Hey, and welcome back to another video. This is the 11th episode of the narrative, which takes place 3 years after the war with the Akatsuki, and Naruto is ready to gain a surprising new colleague to finally take the Chunnin examinations. Please support by liking and subscribing. Let's start the show. Snow covered the ground on a clear cold day at Training Ground 36. Hanabi was sitting on the ground holding onto Konohamaru as he comforted her. She had finally stopped crying and Konohamaru let go over her and took a step back. "Do you feel better now?" he said to her honestly and slightly worried. She picked her head up and looked at him with her red bloodshot eyes. "I feel empty now. That's a lot better than I felt before. Thank you, Konohamaru, for letting me get all that out. I hope you don't think I'm some weird crybaby though," she told him. Konohamaru smiled at her slightly and said, "No, far from it, Hanabi. I am surprised at how strong you are." She gave him a slightly embarrassed look and said, "Strong I am? What are you talking about? I just broke down." Konohamaru said, "You kept that bottled up for 8 months, it takes a lot of strength to do that." He pointed at her clones that were still sparring. "To say nothing of letting all that out and never losing control of your jutsu." She sighed as she leaned back on her hands and looked out at the deep blue sky. "Do you think we will make it, Konohamaru?" He shrugged at her and said, "If anyone can make it with Naruto, it's you. Besides, you're the only one in the village that can keep him in line. Not even Tsunade can fully do that. Who cares if the way you two show affection for each other are different than most relationships? As long as you two are happy together, that's all that matters. If things get tough and you need someone to talk to, you can always talk to me. As fellow pupils of Naruto, we should be there for each other." She smiled honestly at him and said, "You really are starting to act like one of the wise old sages from the storybooks I used to read all the time. You sound a lot like Naruto." He gave her a casual look and said, "That's because he is my master and has been since before I would admit it. I knew long before anyone else that one day he would become one of the most powerful ninjas of his time. I guess that's why I want to become like him. He makes mistakes, but always picks himself up and tries again. He's not perfect and no one ever is. But when you can accept your failures again and again and keep trying, then you can become truly strong and wise over time. It is only then that you understand what it means to live." She looked down and shook her head. "Spoken like a true sage out of a storybook," she said. He gave her a weak smile and said, "Those words were from a wise old sage. King Inma told me that when I asked how the monkey clan saw Naruto." Hanabi nodded her head at him and then turned and gave him a flat look. "You know, it's not really fair. I tell you everything about me and Naruto's relationship and you don't tell me anything about your love life," she said sourly. He looked over to her and honestly said, "That's because I don't have a love life. I was cursed with tainted chakra and wouldn't let myself have those kinds of feeling for a girl. After you freed me from it, I set out to take my sage training. I haven't had the opportunity to have a love life yet." She eyed him carefully and said, "There must be someone you like." He looked away from her shyly and said, "Yeah, there is someone I've had my eye on, but it probably wouldn't ever work out." She grinned at him and said, "Come on, spill it. I've told you tons of things. It's time to give me something back. Who knows, maybe I know her and could help you out." He continued to look away from her and said, "I'm not sure I want to talk about it yet." She sighed in exasperation and said, "If you don't tell me anything, how can I help you?" He thought about it for a long moment. Hanabi got up and leaned over his shoulders from behind with a fake pouting face. He sighed loudly as he looked to the ground and said, "You really aren't going to let this go, are you?" She smiled playfully at him and said, "You can't hint at something like that and leave a girl with nothing. Start talking. You don't have to tell me her name, but at least tell me something about her. Is she really pretty?" He nodded his head. "Yes, she is. One might say she's too pretty," he said with his thoughts far away. Hanabi's eyes narrowed at him as she walked around in front of him. "It's Moegi, isn't it?" Like master, like student, she said. Konohamaru's expression turned to a blank look of confusion before he laughed loudly for a long moment. Ha ha ha. No, it's defiantly not Moegi. She is like a sister to me, not a girlfriend, he said, clearly amused with her guess. Hanabi rubbed her chin in thought. She thought out loud and said, "You're trying to become Hokage like Naruto. You said she is really pretty." She smiled at him knowingly and confidently said, "It's Sakura, isn't it? It makes sense that you would fall for the Hokage's disciple because you want to become Hokage yourself one day." Konohamaru's look changed to a look of shock, dread, and horror. "Not in a million years would he ask her out." Hanabi's smile quickly changed to blank shock at the severity of his reaction to her guess. "Kami, I thought you knew me a bit better than that, Hanabi," he said in disappointment as he hung his head and shoulders. She gave him a strained look and said, "Well, tell me something else about her. What do you like about her?" She is from a powerful clan, but they never expected her to make much of herself. She also took Naruto's Nindo as her own. I'm sure you know how hard of a Nindo that is to keep, he told her knowingly. She looked up in thought while talking to herself. Powerful clan, took Naruto's Nindo, and she is really pretty. She shrugged and said, "I don't know anyone like that. I give up. Who is it?" He gave her a tired look and said, "I thought I didn't have to tell you her name." "Ah, come on. Don't be like that. I can't help you if I don't know who she is," she said with a sly and worried look. "Nope, I've given you more than enough information for you to figure it out," he said as he turned back to start training. She scowled at his back as she got up to start training again. "You know, I never said I was ready to get into a relationship yet. Now that we are sages, we will likely get sent out on much harder missions. My life will be too hectic for a while. Maybe after everything settles down I'll ask her out," he said, and then summoned a clone. "Pretty girls don't stay single for long, Konohamaru. You shouldn't wait too long or someone else might snatch her up before you. Besides, it's the perfect time of year to at least get her a gift and let her know you're thinking about her. If you tell me who it is, I'll get father to invite her to the winter solstice party tomorrow night," she said slyly. He turned back toward her and said, "Nice try, Hanabi, but she's already going to be there." She gave him a confused look as he turned around, summoned a Rasengan and tried to throw it. Naruto was in a hospital room sitting on a bed with his shirt off. Tsunade had her face right up to his stomach examining what was left of the seal. The 9-pronged seal had decayed to the point that only 3 of the prongs were left. She took a step back from him and said, "How long do you think you have?" She looked away from him in a lost manner. He shrugged casually and said, "At least a few months." She sighed as he put his black undershirt back on. "I'm not going to sugarcoat this, Naruto. I think you have 5 months at best. Don't be sad, mother. That is plenty of time for me to teach Konohamaru and Hanabi the last few things I need to. I just need you to give us missions after the holidays so they can get experience in real combat and learn to work together as a team." She looked over at him angrily and hurtfully. "Absolutely not. You aren't leading the village for any reason. That seal could break soon and we don't know what will happen. I can't take that risk, Naruto," she said resolutely. "That's why I can't be in the village Tsunodekin. We don't know what will happen. I could be a danger to the whole village if the seal breaks here," he said softly, trying to reason with her. She looked at the floor, unable to meet his gaze. "I can't, Naruto. You are still the Jinchuriki of the Leaf Village. If the worst happens, we will be held responsible." He looked at her with kindness in his eyes. "But, could you live with yourself if the worst were to happen in the village?" She shook her head and sighed. She looked over at him with the saddest look he had ever seen on her face and begged him, "Please, reinforce the seal, Naruto. I know you can do it. You have your father's blood limit trait of sealing. You can do things with simple seals that a master sealer can't do with a S-ranked seal." He looked down and nodded his head before looking at her again. "Yes, I could, but it would only weaken me. further when it breaks. I can't take that risk. I have to be at my best. He told her calmly. Naruto, please think rationally about this. Even your father couldn't beat the nine-tailed fox. At least let me mobilize a fighting force to help you if you persist in this path. She begged him, reaching for his arm as he put on his overcoat. His calm look turned to one of sad pity for her. Listen to yourself. My father couldn't beat the nine-tailed fox, and you want to send Umbu with me when the seal breaks? I'm sorry to tell you they would only be walking into their own deaths. She stopped her, reaching for him, and pulled her hand back slowly. Tell me, Hokage, have you ever seen a tailed beast in action? He asked her while looking her in the eyes. She grabbed her elbows and looked away. I've seen the intel on the damage they can do. He gave her a slightly sarcastic look and then relaxed and sighed. I was in the center of that battlefield on the day the Fourth Great Shinobi War ended. I watched what they could do, knowing all the while that they were just children compared to the one sealed in me. I'll tell you something that's not in your information on the war. Do you know how I got through the circle of tailed beasts that day? She looked over at him with a quivering, questioning look. I came upon samurai fighting Shikaku, the one-tailed beast. They were getting beat badly as Shikaku toyed with them with his strength. Until Shikaku saw me. He bowed to me as they tried again and again to attack him. Their attacks couldn't hurt him as he used his sand to prevent anyone from following me. He let me through not because Madara commanded him. He let me through because of the nine-tailed fox inside of me. All around me was hell on earth that they were creating. No picture you have seen in a file could come close to making you realize how bad it was. Even if the samurai would have followed me, they all would have died. Only a Jinchuriki could have survived it. The fight looming on the horizon for me is the same. No one else can help me. So please just put my mind at ease and help me finish the lessons I need to teach my students before that time comes. He asked her honestly. It was a clear cold afternoon and the snow was crunching under their feet as Hanabi and Konohamaru arrived at Ichiraku's for lunch. It's Tenten, isn't it? Hanabi asked him. He slumped his shoulders and said, No, it is not her. I knew you had ulterior motives when you agreed to ramen for lunch so quickly. Hanabi looked up in thought as she took a seat and said, Then it must be Eureka. Konohamaru took his seat and said, No, it's not her either. Hey Tichi, 2 bowls of miso please. He looked over from his noodle making and said, Coming up, what do you want today, Hanabi? She turned to him and said, I'll just have the special. Then how about Hiriaki? She guessed. He sighed loudly. Oh come on Hanabi, she is like 9 years old. She gave him a strained look and said, Well, I'm running out of people to guess with. How about another hint then? Is she even from this village? Yes, she is. He said in a tired tone while watching Tucci make their orders. Hanabi narrowed her eyes at him and said, I think I already guessed her and you just didn't tell me. He gave her a flat look and said, Did you forget that I also took Naruto's Nindo as my own? I don't lie either. She sighed and rolled her eyes and then smiled at I am cutting up meat. Then maybe she isn't a ninja. Maybe someone who can cook well. I know it's I am. Konohamaru said. Nope, it's not her. You haven't guessed the Hokage yet. He gave her a sour look. Okay then, lady. He cut her off and flatly said, No. She sighed at him in exasperation. Tucci said, What are you trying to guess, Hanabi? Konohamaru put on a fake smile and whispered over to her. If you tell him, I'll tell him everything about you and Naruto. He warned her. She gave him an uncomfortable grin and said, It's just a riddle, Tucci. A riddle, huh? I used to be pretty good at them. What are your clues? He asked as he dropped noodles into a boiling pot. She took Naruto's Nindo as her own. She is from a powerful clan that didn't expect much from her and she's a ninja from this village. Oh, and she's really pretty. She added quickly almost as an afterthought. Took his Nindo. That's no help. His whole fan club took his Nindo. he said while adding spices to the pot. She's pretty, from a powerful clan, and they didn't expect much from her, he said. Hanabi gave him a questioning look and asked, "Do you know anyone like that Tochi?" He divvied out their orders and set bowls out in front of them. "Yes, I do, as a matter of fact. I'd say the answer to the riddle is you, Hanabi. You probably ruled yourself out too quickly," he said. She gave him a sarcastic look and said, "I'm an heiress. My clan has always expected a lot from me. You weren't always the heiress, though," he said as he went back to his cooking. Hanabi's eyes went wide as she remembered all the times when she was younger and she trained alone while her father trained her sister. But does he know that? He probably does. The Hyuga clan's heiresses and how we became them are public knowledge, she thought as her cheeks turned red. Konohamaru, you already know about, I've told you. She stuttered with a shocked expression on her face. Konohamaru smiled at her and poked her on her forehead. "So what do you want for the winter solstice?" She fell back in shock and caught herself with both hands on the stool next to her. She eyed him blankly for a long moment and her eyes narrowed at him as she used her sage chakra to feel around her. "Ha ha, very funny," she said with a sarcastic look as she righted herself. Konohamaru laughed at her and said, "Naruto isn't the only prankster in this village, Hanabi." Konohamaru and Hanabi were walking down the busy market street looking at shops and stands. Last-minute shoppers were everywhere buying gifts while moving back and forth in the crowded area. "So Konohamaru, what are you going to get Naruto for the solstice?" Hanabi asked while she looked at one of the many merchant stands. He shrugged and said, "The same thing I get him every year. Meal tickets from Ichiraku Ramen." She gave him a tired look and said, "Meal tickets?" She rolled her eyes at him and thought, "That's actually a pretty good idea, knowing Naruto. Wish I would have thought of it." "What are you thinking of getting him?" Konohamaru asked. Hanabi picked up a watch from a stand and replied, "I was thinking a watch might be a good gift. It's useful and practical." Konohamaru snickered. "He'll break it in less than a week, Hanabi. Don't forget how he trains," he told her while looking at a jewelry stand next to her. She gave him a sour expression and said, "Oh yeah, I forgot. Kami, he is hard to buy for. What could he possibly want that I could get him?" Konohamaru gave her a thoughtful look and said, "That's why I always get him meal tickets." She eyed him for a long moment as he looked over gold necklaces. Her eyes narrowed at him in a curious manner as she asked, "You never seemed like the jewelry type to me, Konohamaru." He continued to look at the jewelry stand's wares and said, "I'm not, I was just thinking of taking your advice and getting her gift." Her eyes went wide with a curious shock. "You mean her as in the girl you like?" "I thought that was all a joke." He looked over at her and said, "I did take Naruto's Nindo as my own, I can't lie either. I can only bend the truth." She smiled at him brightly. "You're really going to get her something?" she asked in excited disbelief. He scratched the back of his head while eyeing the necklaces and said, "Yeah, but as you said, I've never been much of a jewelry person. I have no idea what she would like." "I mean, what's this supposed to be?" He picked up a braided gold chain with a tiny golden sphere-like cage trinket on it that had a blue stone hanging in the center of it. An old lady with her gray hair pulled up in a bun turned to him. "Oh, I made that after an illustration I saw in a book about the great sage. I made it look like the Rasengan jutsu he uses," she said with a smile. Konohamaru eyed the straight tiny golden bars and thought it looked more like a birdcage. Hanabi giggled and the merchant woman wore a strained face as she said, "Is there something wrong with my work?" Konohamaru looked over to her and said, "I'm sorry, Miss Merchant Lady, but this looks nothing like the Rasengan. What picture did you model this after?" She said reservedly as she began digging in a box under table. She came up holding a scroll. "I used this illustration to make it." She opened it up and thumbed through it until she found the right place. She set the scroll down on her stand over her items for sale. On the scroll was a well-done picture of Naruto. In his hand he was holding a white orb that was blue in the very center that had points of light shooting out from it. I see now, but that isn't what the Rasengan looks like. That looks more like a bluish sun to me, he said as he picked his head up and looked at her. Yes, but I heard all that have seen the Rasengan died from it. If that's true, then only the great sage himself knows what it truly looks like, she said mysteriously. Konohamaru gave her a slight chuckle. You out-of-town merchants sure are superstitious. That isn't true at all. A lot of people know what the Rasengan looks like in the village, he said. Oh, then you have seen his famed jutsu yourself, have you? Can you describe it to me? She asked smartly. Hanabi tried to cover her smile with her hand as Konohamaru smiled at her. He turned back to the merchant and said, I'll make you a deal. I'll show you the Rasengan if you give me my pick of the necklaces on your stand. She gave him a laugh. You don't know the great sage's famed jutsu? She eyed him critically in disbelief. She grabbed her chin and thought. I think you are trying to hoodwink me here. Very well, if you can show me the Rasengan, I'll let you take one necklace for free save for these three, she said as she pointed at 3 necklaces on her stand. One was a very old and outdated gaudy silver necklace with large yellow gemstones set into it. The next was a thick gold chain with a large ruby on it. The ruby had a strange design inside the gemstone, and the last was a simple, but very heavy-looking gold chain. The last was a heavy-looking gray necklace. I just can't part with these 3 without getting my money back out of them. They are far too valuable to bet with, she said kindly. Konohamaru shrugged casually and said, That's fine. He turned to Hanabi and said, Pick a necklace that you like. You'd know what a girl likes better than me. Hanabi looked over the table for a long time and finally said, I have a whole jewelry box of this kind of stuff, being a noble and all. The only one I would have picked is the ruby necklace she isn't willing to part with. I know what that is, and it's worth a lot of money. It's not something I expected to see at a street vendor's stand. Konohamaru gave her a curious look and said, How is it worth so much more than the rest of them? The vendor smiled at him and said softly so no praying ears could hear, Because that is a dragon's fire gem on that gold chain. It's not for sale, not because of its value, but because of its curse. I only display it in hopes that its rightful owner might one day see it and take it off my hands, Hanabi said. Now I see. That makes sense why it's on your stand out in open view. Konohamaru gave her a confused look and said, I don't get anything you two are saying. Which one of the rest should I pick? Hanabi looked over the table again and smiled. She picked up the merchant's so-called Rasengan and took it off the chain. She put the golden trinket in his hand and said, Why not make this one look like the real thing? He looked down at the small golden sphere and bounced it up and down in his hand. He gave Hanabi a strained look and said, I was trying to get a gift for her, not destroy one. Do you even know how much concentration this jutsu takes? He sighed and hung his head. Hanabi gave him a smile and patted him on the back. It's okay, I have faith in you. He sighed again and picked his head up. He looked intently at the golden charm. He put up the seal of the tiger and said, Shadow Clone Jutsu. A clone of himself appeared as many of the shoppers looked over at him. A long murmur from the crowd around him was emitted as they gathered around him. A small boy tugged at the merchant woman's pant leg. He had a blank look of awe on his face as he said, Grandma, do you know who that is? That's Konohamaru. Who is that? I know you are a huge fan of the great sage, but I don't remember you ever saying that name to me, Zarikia. The young boy gave Konohamaru a huge smile as Konohamaru held out his hat with the trinket. His clone's hands started streaking over and over his hand. A blue whirling orb hummed in his hand a moment later and shined brightly. The Rasengan, he said as he held it over the table in front of her. She looked at it in blank amazement and she admired it from several angles. She watched as the golden sphere she made as it was pulled and stretched in a spiral pattern before her eyes. He closed his eyes as his clone poofed into smoke, and then he slowly let go of the jutsu. The Rasengan faded away and he panted with the tiny golden charm in his hand. Hanabi looked over what the Rasengan had done to it. The small golden bars of the tiny birdcage-like trinket had been twisted into strains of gold so thin that it looked like a spider spun them out of silk. The jutsu's incredible force had compressed it to half its size, but the gleaming blue gem in the center was still intact. Hanabi gave him a worried look as said, "Are you okay, Konohamaru?" He took in several sharp breaths while still holding the trinket. "I think I overdid it using the Rasengan after so much training," he said while catching his breath. "While the stories are nothing compared to seeing the real thing, Grandma," a small boy said excitedly. The merchant looked down at him and then over to Konohamaru, still holding out the gold charm. She smiled at Konohamaru and said, "Whether it was a real Rasengan or not, I do not know. It made my grandson happy though, so the necklace is yours." "Grandma, don't you know who that is?" "That's Konohamaru Sarutobi. He's the one that's training under the great sage Naruto," the boy said in awe. She gave him a curious look and said, "Are you sure?" The boy nodded. "Yes, that's his disciple Konohamaru. There is no mistaking him." She turned and smiled at him. "I hope your girlfriend here really likes what you made for her. My design might have paled to the real thing, but the sapphire is of the highest quality." Hanabi gave her a flat look and she said, "I'm not his girlfriend." Konohamaru was very tired when he looked over at the small boy and said, "You have your facts mixed up. I'm his apprentice, not his disciple." The boy's eyes lit up. "Does that mean he is still looking for one?" he said hopefully. He gave the boy a slight laugh and said, "No, he is not. He already found a great disciple to follow in his footsteps." The boy looked at the ground in sour disappointment. "That's too bad. I always hope I could be the one. I bet he is a really strong." Konohamaru's hand fell to the table and the gold trinket rolled out of his hand. Hanabi caught him from falling and pulled one of his arms around her shoulders to support him. He strained to look at the small boy and said, "Another fact you might want to know, his true disciple isn't a man. It's a girl, and she's the youngest person to ever achieve the rank of sage at the age of 15. "Really?" the boy asked blankly. "She must have arms the size of barrels and be like 7 feet tall." Konohamaru giggled for a short moment and said, "No, she doesn't look like that. She is rather short and she's very pretty. She was also the only one that beat me in the Chunnin exams." He looked at him in shock and said, "No way! You got beat up by a girl? Why didn't you use the Rasengan on her? There's no way you would have lost then." He laughed slightly and said, "I did. She was still standing and beat the heck out of me afterwards." The boy looked at him in blank awe. "Wow, I didn't think any other Chunnin, at least of all a girl, could beat you, Konohamaru. His disciple must be an amazing person. I hope I get to meet her one day," he said longingly. Konohamaru looked at the ground and then back to the boy and said, "Yeah. She is amazing." Hanabi blushed slightly. Naruto was waiting downstairs for Hanabi in the living room. "Kami, she is taking forever. I wish she would just wear her sage uniform to the party like I am. Why do girls have to be so complicated?" he thought. After another long moment he looked at the clock on the wall surrounded by pictures. He rolled his eyes and headed upstairs. He stood in front of the dark oak double doors with a lotus carved on them and knocked. "Hanabi, we are going to be late if you take much longer. Shizen left over an hour ago," he said through the door. "Erg, then come help me. I can't reach the zipper on this dress," she yelled back at him. Naruto wore a strained look as asked, "Am your dot covered right?" He heard her take in a long breath and she said, "Of course I am. All but my back anyways." Naruto opened the door and stepped inside. Hanabi was standing in front of a mirror that had been set on top of one of the shorted dressers in the room. She was wearing a black dress that was tight-fitting around her chest and loose and ruffled around her legs. The back was open as she hadn't been able to reach the zipper at her hip. She held her hair up and said, "Help zip me up." She pointed at the zipper over her shoulder. He walked over to her and grabbed the zipper. He tugged a few times and said, "It's stuck." She gave him an exasperated sigh and said, "No, it's not. Hold the lever of the zipper upright and it will work fine." "Oh," he said as he pulled the zipper up. "This is why you should have just worn a sage uniform. It is so much easier to get into." She gave him a sarcastic look as she went over to a box in front of the mirror and pulled out a red-colored lipstick. She put it on and pressed her lips together. "You still have a lot to learn about girls, Naruto. We like to get dressed up for special occasions," she said as she started twisting her long hair into a bun. She went to put an ornate chopped stick through her bun to hold it up when he caught her hand. "You still have a lot to learn about men too. Most of us prefer a girl to wear their hair down," he said suggestively. She bit her lips together innocently and said, "I didn't know that." She let go of her hair and it fell around her shoulders. She smiled as she turned around and asked, "How do I look?" Naruto eyed her for a long moment in confusion. "Is that the same dress you wore when we went on our first date?" he asked curiously. You notice that it looks the same, but it's not. I've grown in certain areas since then. I couldn't fit into that other dress even if I wanted to. I borrowed this from Hinata. I always wanted to wear it. This is the dress she wore on her 16th birthday at her coming-of-age party. My other dress was just a replica," she said as she picked up her small black purse. "Do you have everything with you?" she asked as she walked up next to him. He reached into his outer coat and pulled out 2 10-inch long scrolls. "Yeah, I sealed everything in here last night." They arrived at the 5-story Hyuga main house hold a short time later. Several of the guests were lingering around the doorway. "Hello, Sage Naruto and Sage Hanabi," one of them said to them. Hanabi was shivering from the cold as Naruto greeted the people outside and quickly escorted her inside. Shikamaru was just inside the entrance wearing his black commander's uniform that had a symbol of his clan over his heart. Naruto took off Hanabi's overcoat and handed it to the butler. Hanabi stepped beside him and linked her arm with Naruto's as she tried to rub the numbness out of her cold limbs. Naruto smiled and said, "Hey Shikamaru. I didn't think you'd make it. How is your son?" He gave Naruto a tired look and said, "He's annoying, all he does is cry and poop. Kurenai got her mother to watch him and Asuma for a few hours so we could come. Why are you so late? Your house is close by." "Oh," Hanabi took her time getting ready, he said as Hanabi blushed slightly and bit her lips together innocently. "Where are Kurenai and Choji?" he asked as he looked around the packed living room. Most of the furniture was gone and a full band was playing soft music in the northern corner of the room. He spotted Lee and Sakura talking at the drink table near the band. Choji took her to get a drink. "She's still pretty sore from giving birth and he is helping me look after her tonight," he replied as a very beautiful girl in a white dress came up to greet them. "Hello sister." "Hello Naruto. They are running a little late with the food, but make yourself at home," she said with a smile. "Wow, you look nice Hinata. How are Shino and Kiba?" he asked. Hanabi's eyes went wide in shock when they locked onto the gold necklace she was wearing. Hinata was wearing a simple gold braided necklace that had a tiny golden sphere with a sapphire in the center of it. "Oh, Kami! That's who he was talking about," she thought as she smiled at Hinata. "They are fine. They are around here somewhere. Knowing them, they are probably out back. They never were much for social gatherings," Hinata said as she turned to her sister and leaned over to her ear. "I see it fits you well, Hanabi. I hope he likes it," she told her quietly. Hanabi grinned shyly and said, "I hope so too. You thirsty?" I'd like to go talk to Sakura and Lee. I'll go get you a drink. Naruto said. Sure, I'll go with you though, she said, refusing to let go of his arm. He chuckled softly and told Shikamaru and Hinata, I'll talk to you both later. Naruto picked his way through the crowded room and got some punch from the server. Hanabi got aged grape juice and followed Naruto over to Sakura and Lee. Lee was wearing his ugly green jumpsuit and stuck out like a sore thumb around all the dressed-up people in formal wear. Sakura was wearing a beautiful red silk dress that hugged her frame all the way to her ankles. It was sleeveless and covered her front tightly. Lee was talking excitedly to Sakura. Those squirrels are quite the tricky devils. They ran off with my lunch that day and didn't even leave me a crumb to eat. Sakura turned when she noticed them and eyed the two of them. Well, don't you two look good tonight? She said with a knowing smile at Hanabi. Lee nodded his head and said, Yes, Hanabi, you are very beautiful tonight. I only wish some of the other guests would stop leering at you. Lee shot one of the leering guys an angry look and they turned away. She blushed slightly and said, Thank you, Lee. Isn't Guy-sensei with you, or are you here with Sakura tonight? Lee shot a quick, strained and worried look over at Sakura. No. I came by myself. Guy-sensei is homesick with a cold. Sakura laughed quietly and said, If I let Lee take me to this, I'd never have let him leave the house in that uniform. Lee's shoulders slumped as he said, Why do you girls always pick on my uniform? Sakura and Hanabi laughed. Lee looked over at Naruto with a twinkle in his eye as he moved closer to him, and his eyes darted back and forth suspiciously. Did you get it? Naruto gave him a tired, knowing look and pulled one of his small scrolls. He laid it out on the floor and said, Unseal. A small pile of random gifts appeared on the floor. He reached down and grabbed a small red box that was only 2 inches square and a lead bar that had the word heavy printed on it. He handed him the lead bar. Here you are. An enchanted weight bar just like I got you the last 2 years running. Lee jumped up and down saying, Yay! My leg weights were getting too light again. I really needed this. Thank you, Naruto. You are the best. Naruto watched him with a slight smile as Sakura eyed the red box in his hand. She smiled at him and asked, Is that one for me? He turned to her while Lee was still cheering. No, Sakura. This one is also for Lee, he said, and Lee instantly stopped cheering and gave him a curious look. He inched closer to him and crouched down to inspect the tiny red box that Naruto was holding in his outstretched hand. What could it be? He already gave me my weights. Lee thought out loud to himself as he rubbed his chin in thought. Naruto pushed his hand closer to him and said, Open it and find out then. Sakura and Hanabi watched him intently as he carefully took the box out of his hand by his fingertips like it was a bomb. He squinted his eyes as he slowly lifted the lid. Lee's eyes lit up with shocked joy. You found it. You found the last one, he yelled. Sakura watched him intently and finally asked, Found what? What did he get you? Lee shot her a flat look in thought and closed the lid on the tiny box as he quickly put it away in his pocket. No, I do not think I will tell you, Sakura-kun. You picked on me for my uniform, he said and stuck his nose up at her. Sakura put on a charming smile and said, Oh, come on, Lee. No, I do not think that will work, Sakura, he said resolutely as Sakura shot him a stern look. Naruto and Hanabi chuckled at her. Naruto picked up a brown grocery bag and an old book. Here you are, Sakura. This is from me and Hanabi. She took the bag in one hand and inspected the book in her other. She gave Naruto a knowing look and said, I can guess which one of you got the herbs and which one of you got me the book. Hey! Herbs are useful, and that's not all that is in that bag, Naruto said, clearly offended. She rolled her eyes as she set the book on the drink table and opened the bag. She gave the bag a queer look as she reached inside and pulled out a cup. On the cup was a picture of a cat and it had the words "I love my cat" written on the bottom of it. She shook her head back and forth in exasperation. I knew it, I just knew it. Naruto, I don't even have a cat. Naruto gave her a strained look and said, Come on, Sakura. You wanted a new drinking cup and this one was on sale. Please don't be mean, it's been a tight year for me. He said the last sentence where only she could hear it. She looked at him and said, Thank you, Naruto. The herbs will help the hospital. She turned to Hanabi and smiled truly at her. She walked over and hugged her. Thank you so much for the book. I've wanted it for years. Where did you ever find a copy of it for sale? Hanabi smiled as Sakura let her go. Open the book to the back cover. Sakura opened the book and looked. Written on the back cover were the words property of the Hyuga clan's medical archives. Please return if found. Sakura gave her a blank stare of disbelief. Hanabi only smiled bigger at her and said, This is a gift from the whole Hyuga clan to you, Sage Sakura. Father said that the only person that ever understood everything in it was Lady Tsunade. She read it in her late teens and it's just been gathering dust since then. Sakura was overwhelmed. Too don't know what to say. I knew this book was very coveted in the medical field. I just can't believe the Hyuga clan would give it up for me. She said, wide-eyed disbelief. Naruto gave her a curious look and said, What is in it that makes it so valuable? Sakura shook her head to clear her thoughts. It's a very accurate book on the human circulatory system, but that's not what makes it so valuable. It is said that in its pages holds a way to perform heart surgery with a 60% or better success rate. Naruto gave her a confused look and said, Why is that so great? Sakura gave him a blank stare of disbelief. Naruto, there is only a handful of medical ninjas alive that would even attempt heart surgery. It's the hardest of all medical procedures. Even Lady Tsunade has only attempted it on the battlefield when there was no other option. She said to Naruto. He gave her a curious and sly smirk as he scratched the back of his head and thought. A medical book, huh? You think you could let me borrow it sometime? Sakura gave him a look of horror and said, Not on your life. Lee shook his head as Hanabi laughed. Naruto resealed his pile of presents sometime later and continued talking to Sakura and Lee about his time away. Hey Naruto! A large man with greased-back brown hair. Naruto waved at him and said, Hey Choji. Choji wiggled his way toward them through the crowd unguessed. He was wearing a formal and very well-made red outfit with the Akimichi clan symbol on his left shoulder. Over it he wore a green sash that had lots of military medals on it. The sash was sectioned off into lines and had the names of his ancestors and what medals they had earned during their time as a ninja. The last name on the green sash was his father's, Choza Akimichi, and it had the 6 medals he had won during the 3rd and 4th Great Ninja War. Naruto eyed him up and down. Choji walked right up to Hanabi and put his hands together. He bowed slightly and respectfully said, Hello heiress Hanabi of the Hyuga clan. Hanabi unhooked her arm from Naruto's and put her hands together and bowed to him. Hello Choji, heir to the Akimichi clan. Choji never broke his bow, but raised his head slightly to look her in the eyes. How is the weather? She looked at him still in her bow and thoughtfully said, Too cold for the dress I wore here. Naruto wore a very confused look as his eyes darted back and forth several times between the two of them. Hey, why are you two suddenly getting all formal and stuff? He asked intently. Hanabi and Choji both came out of their bow. Hanabi gave him a tired and slightly annoyed look. Master, this is how the heirs of the 4 great ninja clans of the village greet each other at formal events. She said with annoyance in her voice. We are required to greet each other with a bow and then exchange casually conversation. Naruto eyed Choji in confusion and then turned back to Hanabi with pointing at Choji. You mean to tell me Choji is a noble? She shook her head at him in disbelief. You mean you didn't know he was a noble? How long have you known each other? She asked while eyeing him carefully. Naruto looked up and thought. Nope, He never said anything about it to me. I've known him since I was 10 though. I know he loves barbecue and you better not take the last piece of food on the table if you know what's good for you," he said. Hanabi sighed loudly as Choji told him. "Technically you're a noble too, Naruto, even more so than Hanabi and I." He shot him a confused look as he pointed at himself in disbelief and said, "Me a noble? How so?" Choji raised one of his eyebrows curiously and said, "You do know that you are the last known living descendant of your mother and your father's clan, right? That technically makes you the head of both clans and makes you a noble." Naruto eyed him in a reserved manner and said, "No one ever greeted me in that weird way though." "That's because no one ever taught you how to be a noble," Choji said knowingly. Sakura smiled at him and said, "It's okay, Naruto, just stay the way you are. We don't need you acting like a noble anyway. Most people wouldn't believe it was you if you did." "Has your father been well, Choji?" Hanabi asked him. "Yes, he has been fine, but his parrot died last week though," he said. Hanabi gave him a sad look and said, "Squirkers died?" "Yes, he was over 40 years old," he said. "Squirkers? How do you know the name of his father's parrot?" Naruto asked curiously. "Mr. Akimichi used to babysit me sometimes when I was younger. I used to play at Choji's house when no one from my clan could watch me," Hanabi said. "So do you two have known each other for a long time?" he asked. Choji nodded his head. "Yes. I even used to help her build sandcastles in our backyard and play ninja with her. Even back then she was a little serious." Naruto scratched the back of his head and said, "Man, I didn't know that at all." A short time later everyone was called to the table for dinner. Fine porcelain plates with a gold leaf design on them and gleaming silverware was placed in front of each guest. Naruto was seated near the head of the table next to Hanabi. Across from him was Tsunade wearing her formal Hokage uniform. Lord Hyuga entered the room from a side door wearing his normal white uniform and raised his hand for silence. The noise from everyone talking died down. He slowly put his hand down and said, "I'd like to welcome you all to our winter solstice party. We will be serving the food shortly. But before that I'd like you all to know that a very special guest will be joining us tonight. He rarely has time to visit our village, so please be on your best behavior tonight. Also remember, those of you on the council, that there is to be no political negotiations at the celebration." The double doors next to the back of the room opened loudly in the silent room and Hayashi bowed his head. A mountain of a man stepped into the room. He was just over 7 feet tall, dressed in the finest of crimson red robes. A large belt with a gold buckle was around his waist. Around his neck hung a heavy golden crest on a thick chain. On his left ring finger was a crest ring big enough for most people to wear as a bracelet. His red hair and beard were neatly combed and he had a big red scar over his left eye. Lord Hyuga presented his hand toward the giant man and said, "I'd like you all to welcome." "Red Scar? What are you doing here?" Naruto asked in shock as he pointed at him. The big man smiled at him as everyone else looked wide-eyed at Naruto for his outburst. Shikamaru whispered quietly to Naruto from down the table. "Naruto, you idiot! Don't you know who that is?" Naruto dropped his pointing hand and with a confused look at Shikamaru he said, "Of course I know who that is. It's Red Scar, the ship captain. He's a fleet commander of the high seas. He is the one that gave me the wood to make the sheath for this." Naruto reached behind him and unhooked Raijin out from under his overcoat and held it out in front of him. Shikamaru sighed. Neji cleared his throat and said, "Naruto. Weapons are forbidden at the celebration." Sakura's forehead vein was bulging and she yelled at Naruto. "Naruto, did your training fry your brain? Just shut up already. He isn't whoever you think he is." Naruto gave her a flat look and said, "There is no way he could fool my chakra sensory perception." Red Scar walked over to the head of the table where a much larger chair that could support his massive weight had been placed for him. "Greetings, great sage Naruto, and to everyone else. He took his seat as he looked over at everyone with a grand smile. The Hyuga lord with a very awkward and strained look took his seat next to Tsunade. Wait, Red, how do you know I'm a sage? And why are you here at a ninja celebration? I thought civilians weren't allowed inside the village like this. He asked with a questioning look. Red Scar let loose a great bellow of a laugh for a long moment. When he finally stopped laughing, he turned to the Hokage and said, "It looks like you won our little wager." Red Scar turned to Naruto and said, "It is true, I am a civilian sage, Naruto, but then again it's a civilian that rules the country. Naruto, you're making a spectacle and you obviously don't know who you are talking to. This is the ruler of our nation, the Lord of Fire, Harika no Miya," Hayashi said in a quiet, stern voice as he crouched over the table at him. I thought the Lord of Fire was an old man," Naruto said with a confused look. Harika smiled and said, "My grandfather stepped down 3 years ago, Sage Naruto. I have been the ruler of the country ever since." Naruto gave him a more confused look and said, "Then why the deception?" He gave him a knowing look and said, "If you were the ruler of the nation and you wanted to really see what was going on in a village, would you announce your presence before coming? Think about it carefully, Naruto. If something devious was going on, then the ones doing it would take steps to hide their actions while I was visiting. If they didn't even know I was in their village, then they wouldn't even suspect they were being watched. Just because I'm a civilian doesn't mean I can't think like a ninja when I need to." Tsunade was giggling softly in her seat as the Lord of Fire spoke again. "Come now, Sage Naruto, didn't you find it odd that every time I was in the bar that I always found a way to join Lady Tsunade? I was always there with her long after you left. I hope you know that ninjas aren't allowed in there. What better place could there be for me to speak to the Hokage unnoticed?" he said. Naruto squinted at him and said, "I didn't find it odd because she clobbered you that one time. I figured you knew better after that. Man, I should have left a clone with you guys. I feel pretty dumb now." Naruto crossed his arms. Harika laughed and said, "Me too. I bet, Tsunade, you'd eventually recognize me." He took out a small pouch and pulled out 3 gold coins. He handed them to Tsunade. "Here you are, you swindler. I warned you before you made the bet with me." She smiled as she took the coins and put them away. The servers were already setting out the steaming food when Harika said, "Dear me, I'm forgetting my manners. I'm sorry for rambling, Lord Hyuga." The Lord of Fire presented his hand out to him to give him the floor. Hayashi nodded and stood up. "Today we give thanks for another year gone by. We give thanks for the bountiful feast the land has provided us this evening. We also remember those of us that didn't make it and thank them for their sacrifices on this day. There is also one person I'd like to thank someone personally on behalf of my clan in this evening's prayer. Even though he is ill-suited to the rules of the noble clans and managed to make even the Lord of Fire to forget his manner." He turned to Naruto and said, "On behalf of the village, thank you for giving the village 2 more sages. On behalf of the Hyuga clan, thank you for training our heiress and giving us our first sage." Naruto smiled slightly and nodded his head. Hayashi turned back to everyone and said, "May we all live another year or die a ninja's death in battle with our enemies." Everyone cheered loudly and then started to dig into the food. Naruto, true to his political idiocy, went right back to calling the ruler of the nation by his nickname in short order. "Red, how did you get to be the Lord of Fire? I mean, you don't seem like the type to be doing all this bowing and formal name greeting," Naruto asked while cutting a steak on his plate. Red Scar threw back his head and gave him a short laugh. "You are right there, Naruto. Truth be told, I never wanted to become the Lord of Fire. I was much like you were in your younger years. I was free and wanted to live my life away from all the political drivel of the royal family. My father died when I was young because of foul play. My uncle Rakan took me in and found me to be an unruly teen to deal with. He constantly tried to drag me into the political arena even though he knew I hated it. Rakan was a very strict man and commanded our naval fleet under my grandfather's guidance. As you know, the ninjas are our hidden army on land, but we still have an open navy that is mainly used for shipping. In times of war they too are called to fight. 24 years ago my uncle brought me with him to the war room. I was a skinny little boy of only 14 years when this happened. He wanted me to see and learn from how they planned out their defenses and trade routes. Of all the things he tried to teach me, the only one that I would put the vaguest of effort into was naval strategy. There wasn't much political arguing for hours in it. That's the only reason I took a liking to it. During the meeting they planned out a ship formation where one ship acted as bait while the cargo ships sailed out and away from it. I spoke out to his aide that was formulating the plan and told him that the Shinzer line formation was far safer and didn't needlessly put people's lives in danger. The Shinzer line formation is basically where a fighting ship heads the group and another one covers the rear of the formation. My uncle actually smiled at me and complimented my strategy. His aide Zalika warned me that speaking out in front of those of higher rank was dangerous and I could get challenged for such an offense. Zalika was a sickly-looking man in his late teens. I foolishly berated him into challenging me. The only other thing that my uncle praised me for was my talent using the royal family's crimson flame. Zalika was only half royal blood and his abilities were far weaker than my own. He said, What is this crimson flame thingy you are talking about?" Naruto asked with a confused look on his face. Hanabi shot him a sour look as Red Scar gave him a curious one while leaning back in his chair. He raised an eyebrow at him and said, "You really haven't heard of it, Naruto?" Naruto shook his head and said, "No, what is it?" "Well, you would call it the royal family's blood limit trait, but it's our jutsu even though we aren't ninja. Here, I'll show you." The giant man held out his open hand. Naruto's eyes went wide as he gave Hayashi a strained look. He quickly shook his open hands in front of himself, trying to warn Red Scar. No, don't do any jutsu at the table. Lord Hayashi will kick you out of the house." "Trust me, I know." Hayashi calmly set down his knife and fork by his plate and looked over at Naruto. He folded his hands together and calmly said, "Naruto, that rule only applies to you. Everyone else has enough common sense to know not to use any dangerous jutsu in the house." Almost everyone that heard the Hyuga Lord laughed openly, even the Lord of Fire. Naruto mumbled sourly to himself. "Why only me?" Once Red calmed his bellowing roar of laughter, he turned to Hayashi and asked politely, "Can I please have your permission to show everyone my crimson flame, honorable Hyuga Lord?" Hayashi bowed slightly and respectfully said, "Of course, my lord. I would like to see the famed jutsu of the royal family if you would be so kind to give us a demonstration." "Thank you," he said formally. He closed his eyes in concentration as a beautiful ruby flame appeared in his hand. The light from it casted a red glow throughout the room that engulfed even the yellow lamps that should have been able to outshine it. The ruby flame flickered slowly from side to side. Many in the room openly awed at its beautiful light. Naruto eyed the flame intently in his hand. "I can do that too, but the color isn't that royal red color." The Lord of Fire raised a curious eyebrow at him and said, "Oh really? Is it a blue flame?" Naruto shook his head as he closed his eyes in concentration and put up the half-tiger seal in front of his face. He said, "No, anyone with enough chakra could summon a blue flame. Mine is a different color altogether." Naruto's mind expanded as he became one with everything for miles around him. The thin dark lines around his eyes expanded and encompassed his eyes. The only thing keeping Hayashi from protesting was Hanabi's genuine smile at Naruto. Naruto held his hand out near Haruka's as a brilliant golden flame appeared in his hand. He opened his eyes as the neon golden flame in his hand lit the red room up and turned it orange as his light mixed with the Lord of Fire's light. "This chakra is yellow," he said as he held it out in front of himself. The Lord of Fire stared in wonder at his chakra. "Golden chakra." He shook his head and released his flame. The quiet room suddenly filled up with several people whispering to each other. Golden chakra, its light was so warm and full of life. Even his father couldn't summon a flame like that. Haruka thought in quiet shock. Naruto caught Hayashi's dangerous shocked look and released his sage chakra flame before quickly saying, So what happened next? Oh right, where was I? Ah yes, I picked a fight with Zalika. I went to the nobles fighting arena quite confident that I would be able to win. However, when I entered the arena, it wasn't Zalika waiting for me, it was my uncle. You see, when I berated his aide, I insulted my Raken's honor. He is the one that took the field that day to face me, not Zalika. My easy victory quickly turned into a stark horror. My uncle was vastly more powerful than I was. I was so scared that I couldn't even fight back. He beat me down again and again. When I kept refusing to fight him, he used his powerful crimson flame on me. He left me with this scar. He traced the jagged lines of the scar that ran down his forehead and through his left eye. He then told me I wasn't worthy of serving in the royal family if I wouldn't even fight back and banished me from the royal line. I was commanded to serve 2 years in the naval fleet as my sentence. I hated him for a while for this, but now I respect him for it. I fell deeply in love during my time serving as a second lieutenant on the ship I was stationed on, he said with a whimsical look on his face. Hanabi said in surprise. You fell in love with a woman? Red Scar nodded his head and said, Yes, I did, but not exactly how you phrased it. I fell in love with the mistress that is the sea. She is the most beautiful and most dangerous of all mistresses. She can be the most placid blue one moment and a deadly storm that could tear you asunder the next. Ultimately, my uncle gave me the scar on my face, but he also gave me what I had always wanted. He gave me my freedom, and I found it on the open seas. A day with the wind at my back and the spray of the sea on my face was always my greatest joy. I served my 2 years at sea and even willing took on an extra year. After 3 years at sea, I scraped together my earnings and bought a small schooner vessel of my own. I started delivering goods to local villages and quickly earned a reliable reputation. Within a year, I had 6 schooners in my fleet, and I sold 4 of them to buy my first seagoing ship. The Crimson Wave Cutter. The first time I heard her name, I knew she was destined to be mine. She is still in my fleet today as one of my fastest scout ships. I went to deliver goods to a small village in the southern coast of the Land of Fire some time later, and something happened. We offloaded our cargo as always, and I headed to a house of ill repute. I always had a weakness for women in my younger years. I am not proud of this fact, but it is true. I paid for my company for the night and waited for her in a dank, small room with children's toys littering the floor. I found this slightly odd, but paid it no mind at the time. I was mortified when my company for the night wasn't a woman at all, but a small girl no more than 8 years old. Her eyes were lifeless from the abuse that her slavers had put her through. It took me over an hour to break through the wall she had built around her mind to get her to even talk to me of her own free will. She told me how the place she lived in used to be an orphanage run by kind holy people and how they had been brutally killed by the slavers. She told me every horrid detail of her life for the last 2 years and the abuse she has suffered. My first mate burst through the door as I was holding the crying child. He told me of his own encounter with a young child. I let go of her and told my first mate to take her to the ship. She clung to me, and I told her that the horrors she endured under the slavers were nothing compared to what I was about to do to them. The crimson flame burned brightly in me. I turned every one of the slavers I could find into ash that day. I only left a skinny teenage boy of 14 years old that was acting as the host and the head slaver alive. I interrogated the head slaver and questioned him how the local authorities could turn a blind eye to that obvious transgression to the law. He told me, though his bloodied mouth, that they had to turn a blind eye to it because someone in the royal family set up the business. I scoffed at his obvious lie until he reached into his pocket and gave me a royal crest ring like the one I'm wearing. A name was etched into the ring. It was Zalika's ring. Before the slaver died from the beating I gave him, he told me that there were other houses like this one that had been set up throughout the Land of Fire. I turned to the teenage boy, who was terrified out of his mind. I questioned him about these other slave houses. He knew nothing, but he did confirm Zalika was there when everything started and that he was the only boy they left alive. The others were of no use to them and were put to the sword. Over the next few days I found a group of monks and turned the orphanage over to them. I set out to find these other slave houses soon afterwards and took the teenage boy known as Yaren with me. Over the next year my fleet grew as did my fame and infamy. Some saw me as the Crimson Flame hero and others saw me as a rogue vigilante. After word reached Zalika that I was shutting down his slave houses, he put out a bounty on my head. I had to stick to the high seas for some time. I had to be careful when I did dock and make sure to only trade with people I knew were friendly to me. Word reached me of another slave house that had recently been set up and my fleet of ships headed there. I took 50 of my best men and entered the village. We had become a skilled and efficient fighting force when shutting down these slave houses. When we reached this one there was no one there and we were suddenly surrounded by thugs. It was all a trap set up by Zalika. He showed himself and mocked me for my rogue justice. He told me I still didn't understand the big picture, that I was still a naive boy. I told him that at least I wasn't a mastermind slaver that preyed on children for coins. He openly laughed at me and told me I still didn't even understand the basic structure of the royal family. He told me something I had suspected, but didn't want to believe. He told me he was just following orders to my uncle's orders. He told me that the third great ninja war couldn't be found on my honorable ideals. That some evils were necessary to raise funds for the war. He was about to give the order for his men to attack me when kunais rained down from the sky. 2 ninja appeared in between us and the thugs. He stopped for a moment to take a drink. Naruto curiously asked, "Who are these ninjas?" The giant man smiled as he pointed his arm down the table. "One of them is sitting at this table, Kakashi. He was about 13 at the time. The other was the famous war hero, the Yellow Flash, Minato. They were traveling back to the Leaf Village and heard the disturbance. They came to find out what was going on. One of my men stated that 2 ninja made little difference and that they would willingly fight to the death rather than being taken captive. I told my men that whatever they did they were not to attack the 2 ninjas. I told them that if they attacked the yellow-haired man we would all die. I was a powerfully built man of over 6 feet tall and in the prime of my youth, but I knew I stood no chance against seasoned war hero veteran like Minato. Zalika grinned and told Minato that I was the infamous Crimson Criminal and told him a number of my crimes that I had committed while saving the children from the slavers. I told him of what I did and that I had proof that Zalika was slaving out children for profit. Zalika ordered Minato to take me captive as a member of the royal family. Minato told him that he had no authority to order him to do anything. That he had overstepped his bounds and only the Hokage could give him an order. Not even the Lord of Fire himself was allowed to give a ninja a order save to the Hokage himself. He told Zalika and myself that we both were under arrest as an arrow flew over Zalika's head and stuck into the ground near him. Yaren showed up with the rest of my crew. We outnumbered them 2 to 1 now and he told them that no one was arresting me while he was there. Yaren had shown me such loyalty that he became my second in command even at the age of 15. I halted him and told him I would go willingly. My crew members disapproved and I told Yaren that he was in command until I returned. Yaren ordered the men to round up the thugs and then handed over command to another. He told me that if I was going to turn myself in and try to get Zalika convicted in the royal court that he would be there to testify as a witness. Minato agreed to take us, but Zalika tried to resist. He was easily knocked out by Kakashi and my men turned the thugs over to the local authorities. My crew returned to the ships with heavy hearts as I was taken back to the Leaf Village in chains. I was presented before the 3rd Hokage and recounted my tale. I showed him my proof and he thought for a day on the matter before summoning me again from my jail cell. He told me that for my crimes I should be put to death under the laws of the land. That it was not my right to take the law into my own hands and kill those thugs even if it was to save children from the slavers. He, however, told me that he would not call for my execution. He felt I was in the right yet far too brutal in my methods. He told me my accusation against the royal family outstripped his bounds as Hokage and that I would have to go before them. We were escorted to the royal court under Umbu guard. It was there I presented my evidence to the royal family in the presence of the Lord of Fire. I charged my uncle and Zalika with the crime of slavery and cruelty to children. I didn't realize how much of a monster my uncle really was until that moment. I had always respected him greatly. He didn't even deny my charges. He told the court that he was doing the children a favor. That without his doing they would have starved or be a burden on the country when it was already at war. He said that the money collected from the slave houses did not go into his own pocket, but helped further the war fund. I was outraged and told him that using children as common goods wasn't right no matter the reason. My grandfather, the Lord of Fire, called a break for deliberations. They returned a few hours later and he read the verdict. He said that Zalika would be charged with the crime of slavery. He told the court that my criminal record would be wiped clean in exchange for my uncle's name never being revealed in the crimes. I was even more outraged and yelled to my grandfather, "If you don't convict him for his crimes, you are placing him above the law. How does that make you any better than him?" He sighed at me and told me, "What would you have me do? We are at war and his skills in the naval fleet are unparalleled. To lose those skills when we were at war would be a great blow to the nation." I simmered in my anger at what was transpiring before my eyes. I told him to reinstate my royal heritage and that we would settle this matter as royals with a battle of the Crimson Flame. I challenged my uncle before the royal court. He openly laughed at me and said he didn't need to waste his time with trash like me. The Lord of Fire thought for a long moment and asked me, "So there is no way you will keep silent on this matter?" I see he named me as a member of the royal family again and told my uncle that we would fight to the death. The loser would be blamed for the crimes. Another dirty political move, but if it had to be that way, I would accept it. My uncle shot me an angry scowl and then he grinned at me. He told me I still didn't stand a chance of surviving. We took the field and started fighting. I still wasn't a match for my uncle. He toyed with me while explaining that I didn't see the big picture. That some evils were necessary for the greater good of the country. He beat me down again and again. He would always let me stand again before starting in on me with his words and his fiery fist. I told him I would never accept something so horrible as being for the greater good. The crimson flame poured out of me and set the field around me ablaze. I turned my flames on my uncle with conviction and told him, "No, this is for the greater good." His body turned to ash before my eyes. I thought I would feel righteous, yet I did not. I saw that my uncle was right when he called me a heartless butcher. I was no different than him. I placed myself above the law to do what I felt was right. I felt empty, hollow, and disgusted with myself. I felt that I had become the thing I was trying to stop. A monster. My grandfather came down to the field as my uncle's ashes blew into the wind. He told me he had heard of my naval skills and wanted me to take over my uncle's place as High Commander of the naval fleet. I hung my head and refused him. I told him that someone with so much blood on his hands doesn't deserve such a grand title. I told him I never was much for politics and that I would return to my merchant fleet. He told me that he was sad to see me go, but if the life of the open sea was calling me, then there was nothing he could do to stop me. He wished me luck and I left a free man. I sailed all around the world trading goods and growing my fleet until just over 3 years ago my grandfather summoned back to the royal halls. I entered his royal audience hall and saw him for the first time in 15 years. He was thin and weak. His age was wearing on him. I walked up to him and bowed. I asked why he had summoned me and he told me his time was near. He needed someone to take over as the Lord of Fire and he had chosen me. I told him that I never wanted to become the Lord of Fire and that surely another member of the royal family was better suited for it. He told me they were all too corrupt from politics. That even though they could run the county they felt nothing for its people. He said they treated them like pieces on a shogi board. They are just means to an end to them. He told me that none of them had the right mindset to become the Lord of Fire. He said that the people do not serve the Lord of Fire, but that the Lord of Fire serves them. He said that he knew I was destined to be his successor the day he saw my crimson flame when I fought my uncle. My grandfather told me my flame was brighter than even his father's. I replied to him that I wasn't qualified for the job. He replied that ruling a nation is much like running a fleet of ships. The ships were like the villages, captains were like their leaders, and their sailors were like their people. He told me I already had the makings of a great ruler and I cared about the country's people. That I didn't plot to kill the other members of the royal family or expose them in order to gain rulership. He said that I understood rulership for what it was. A heavy burden that could only be carried by the strong and that it would wreak havoc in the hands of the power-hungry. I told him I could never become a great ruler like him. He told me he saw his rule as a failure and that all great leaders always would see themselves as failures in the end. He told me how he had lived through 2 wars under his rule and that politics had run amok. It was the way all great leaders thought. Our ambitions always outstrip our reign. I helped his frail body over to the window and he pointed down at the streets below. He said that if he was such a great leader, then why were there people starving on his doorsteps? I knew of the problem he spoke of. If you feed the poor, they will keep coming back expecting you to feed them again. Their numbers will only increase as more people will seek to live off the generosity of others. If things continued, the poor would eat the generous into poverty. It's a lesson I learned long ago in the royal courts. He turned to me and told me to kneel. When I did, he took the royal crest he was wearing around his neck and placed around my own. He told me that I was the 5th Lord of Fire whether I wanted to be or not. I was free to hand off my title at any time. He told me that it was far better to make sure slave houses never popped up in the first place than it was to stamp them out when corruption had already taken hold. It took me a few days for me to come to grips with it, but I accepted the title of the Lord of Fire. It has been hard to leave the country and I don't get to go out on the high seas much anymore, but I am content with my life. I hope to one day find my own successor and return to my mistress, that is the sea. He finished his tale. Naruto asked, "Wait, what happened to Zalika? Was he killed for his crimes?" The large man shook his head. "No, he was only following orders. He still serves the naval merchant fleet as second in command under Yaren." Hanabi gave him a confused and shocked look and said, "Isn't that a strained relationship?" "I mean, he did help enslave Yaren if I follow the story right." He nodded his head. "That is true, he did, but truth is stranger than fiction. Yaren forgave him long ago. You can't hold a grudge forever. They work well together. They are the reason why the trade routes at sea are so safe and efficient around the Land of Fire," he said. Tsunade gave him a knowing look and said, "He takes full advantage of those routes. He always takes the long way here when he is able to leave the royal house." He gave her a strained look and said, "Come now, Lady Tsunade, must you say that? I'm always cooped up in that castle presiding over new laws and budgets. Is it so wrong for me to take a little detour on my way here to hear your reports?" She gave him a sarcastic look and said, 2 weeks late is hardly what I'd call a little detour. Your council sends me messages frantically every time you're late getting back. Speaking of which, did you tell them you were leaving this time? It seems strange that you would visit us during the winter solstice. The royal family always makes a big deal about its celebration." He wore a very strained look and said, "Yes, I mean, well, sort of. I left a message on the High Counselor's desk under a stack of paperwork we was supposed to do. He should have found it by now." The Hokage sighed and rolled her eyes. She put her head in her hands and then looked down the table. "Kakashi." He dropped his head and said, "I'll get right down to the Umbu messaging center and let them know." She pointed at him sternly and said in a warning manner, "You owe me for this. I want 2 cases of the royal sake as payment." He smiled at her and said, "Of course. I'll head down to the Takis and get it for you before I leave." Hanabi nodded her head and said, "That explains why you like that sake so much." "Yes, he keeps Takis stocked with it for me. If he didn't, I'd turn his overly large butt into his council every time he is late getting here," she replied. "A fair trade if there ever was one," he said with a smile. Everyone finished dinner and returned to the large living room area. Hayashi stood in front of the band and called for silence. We will be starting the evening's formal dance soon to ring in the solstice at midnight. Please take this time to finish exchanging gifts and store them away before we start." Everyone started moving around and exchanging gifts. Naruto unsealed both of his scrolls and started hand out the gifts he had gotten everyone. He gave Shikamaru 2 decorated sets of shogi pieces. Kiba and Shino eventually found their way over to him. "Hey Naruto," Kiba said with a wave. Naruto picked up a small vial of yellow liquid and quickly handed it to him. "Here, and don't ever ask me to get that disgusting stuff again. I have no clue why you would want something so gross." He smiled and got right up to his ear. "I wanted it because it's an aphrodisiac in Inuzuka clan," he whispered musically to him. Naruto wore a disgusted look on his face and took a step back holding his nose. "I don't care what it is. Just keep it away from me," he protested. "Thanks Naruto, you're the best," he said with a laugh and turned to store it away. Naruto dug through his pile of stuff and handed Shino a small cylinder 6 inches high. Shino took the gift and eyed it strangely. "Why did you get me fish food?" Naruto gave him a confused look and took the cylinder back. He eyed her intently for a moment. "Ah Kami, I grabbed the wrong one. This is for my fish. I got you beetle food. I'll have to give it to you later. You know you're always one of the hardest people to buy for Shino," he said loudly. A dark cloud appeared over Shino's head as he mumbled to himself. He remembered everyone else's gift, yet not mine. Why? He turned and gloomily walked away as Naruto sighed. "Great. Not again." He spotted Hinata and Neji exchanging gifts and waved them over. "Hello Naruto. I see you are still handing out your gifts," she said. "Yeah, hold on, I'll find yours," he said as he grabbed a book and handed it to her. She took the book and looked at it. Tactical Advantages of the First Hokage. She read the title out loud. He smiled and said, "I hope you haven't read that one." She shook her head and said, "No, I haven't read this one." "Thank you Naruto-kun. I have to find father to give him my gift. I will talk to you again soon." He reached down and picked up another book and handed it to Neji. He respectfully took the book with a bow. "Thank you for retrieving my father's diary from the archives Naruto," he said. "Any time. Let me know if there are any other books from the Hyuga section you want to borrow," he said. "Thank you, I will," he said with a nod. Choji found him next as he picked up a stack of food tickets and handed them to him. "I hope you like them," he said with a smile. "I always do," he said with a big smile. Naruto look suddenly became serious as he pulled out a small box from his pocket and handed it to Choji. Choji nodded his head and said, "I'll make sure she gets it." "Thanks Choji. I've been trying to stay on the other side of the room from her." "Congrats on finally getting a date with her though," he said with a knowing smile. Choji blushed slightly and said, "I'm only her escort tonight. I am still helping Shikamaru with Kurenai and all." Naruto smiled knowingly at him and said, "So here you are." Tsunade walked up with sigh and eyed his shrinking pile of gifts. "I see my gift," she said as she gazed at a large bottle. "Yeah, I can't compete with Red's 2 cases, but here is 1 bottle of the sake you like," he said as he handed it to him. She took the bottle and gave him a hug. "Thank you Naruto." He let her go and said, "Now don't go getting hammered tonight." She gave him a flat look and said, "1 bottle is hardly enough to get me drunk Naruto. By the way, what gift did Naruto get you Hanabi?" Hanabi looked blankly as she did something very unladylike. She crouched slightly and reached up her dress. She unhooked a weapon and presented it in front of her. She said calmly, "He gave me the Flying Thunder God, of course." The Hokage shook her head in exasperation. "Why am I not surprised you'd be carrying it on you while wearing that dress when you're Naruto's student?" Sai chuckled softly. "Oh right. Here, Sai, I got the last one they had in stock. I hope you like it, he said as he picked up a clear box that had a paint set inside. He took the box and said, "Thank you. I was starting to run low." Naruto only had 2 gifts left to give out. One was in a black leather case and the other was in a mid-sized brown box. Tintin found her way over to him. She was dressed in a formal pink kimono. "Man, I haven't seen you all night, Tintin. Were you working that late at your shop?" he said as he handed her the brown box. She smiled knowingly at him and said, "I know you haven't seen me all night. I planned it that way." "Huh, you planned it? What do you mean?" He looked around in confusion as all of his friends surrounded him. Hinata grabbed a hold of Hanabi and moved her behind Naruto where she couldn't see. Tintin smiled even bigger and said, "It's time we give you your gifts. You need to open that black case first though." He looked at her in utter confusion as he picked up the black case. "But that would ruin the surprise," he said in a disappointed manner while clutching the case. Lee and Niji walked up beside her. Niji stepped forward and pulled out a cobalt blue kunai. "This is from all of Team Guy," he said as he held it out in front of him. Naruto blinked at him blankly. "Wait, Tintin, you guys didn't," he said in disbelief. Niji smiled proudly and walked up to him. He opened the case in his arms and placed the kunai in the 4th indention next to the other 3. Hanabi struggled slightly as Hinata held her still. "I can't see Hinata," she complained. She smiled at her sister and said, "That's the idea. You'll see soon enough." She shot her sister an angry scowl, but did not move. Choji, Kurenai, Shikamaru and Choza came before him next. Shikamaru wore a slightly annoyed look as he stepped forward. "You know, Naruto, you're a real pain in the ass. Now it's going to take me another mission before I can buy a house," he said as he pulled out a cobalt blue kunai from his sleeve and held it by his fingertips with the blade pointing up in front of his face. He held his other hand up with his pointer finger less than an inch from his thumb. "I was this close to becoming the man of the house and not having Kurenai call me a lazy loafer at her house. This is from Team Asuma, even Choji's dad pitched in for it," he said as he placed it in the 5th slot. Kiba, Shino and Hinata came before him next. Naruto was already speechless from shock. Hinata smiled and came forward as she pulled out a kunai. "This one is from us, Naruto-kun. We hope you like it," she said as she placed it in the 6th slot. Konohamaru, Moegi, Udon and Ebisu came forward next. "Wait, not you guys too?" Naruto said in disbelief. Ebisu pushed his glasses up. "You don't think we were going to let the older squads outdo us, do you?" he said as he came forward and filled the 7th slot. "Thank you for teaching us, Naruto," Moegi said with a smile. Udon nodded his head in agreement. "Yes, thank you for guiding us." They stepped away as Konohamaru came forward. "Master, I'm kinda leery about giving you this. I have a feeling it will be used on me often," he said worriedly as many in the room laughed. He placed his kunai in the 8th slot and walked back. Kakashi was the next to come forward. He eyed him carefully and said, "You always were a stubborn student. I know you wanted to buy these by yourself, but consider it one sensei helping the next generation sensei." He placed his kunai in the 9th slot. Sakura stepped forward and smiled evilly at him. She pulled out a blue kunai and walked up to him. "This is from me. It's your gift and my rent for the next 2 years. So remember that, Naruto." Naruto managed a quiet laugh as several others joined him. "Thank you, Sakura," he said as she placed it in the 10th slot. Lord Hyuga and the entire Hyuga clan were the next ones to present themselves before the sage. Hayashi stepped forward and pulled out 2 kunais. "Sage Naruto, I felt that this was a very strange gift to get you when I know what you are going to do with it. Tintin, however, insisted this is what you would want. On behalf of the Hyuga clan we give you these. Call it our thanks for training Hanabi as well as our winter solstice gift to you." He walked up with a kunai in each hand and placed them in the 11th and 12th slots. Naruto bowed his head in thanks to the entire Hyuga clan. Tsunade handed her official Hokage hat to Hayashi and stepped up to him. I can still remember when you were a snot-nosed Chunnin and now you rival even legends from long ago. You have helped this village so much and Tenten had to let us all know when you needed our help. Kakashi is right, you are stubborn, she said as she pulled out 2 kunais from her robes. On behalf of me and the entire Leaf Village I present you with this, she said as she placed one of the kunais in the 13th slot. She held the other in front of her and said, You owe Razor Wing, our fastest messenger Hawk, some serious treats for this one. On behalf of Kazekage Gaara and the village hidden in the sand I present you with this. She placed the kunai in the 14th slot. Only the last slot in the case remained. Thank you, mother, he said in disbelief that this was happening. Thank you to everyone that did this for me, he said as he looked around to everyone smiling at him. Hanabi was very annoyed and told Hinata through gritted teeth, How much longer am I supposed to be kept in the dark? I should have looked when you went up there. She smiled at her and said, I know you hate being kept in the dark, but there is only one more. He smiled slightly at Tenten and said, This was a dirty trick, Tenten, but thank you, now I only have the last one to buy. Tenten smiled at him and said, You were almost right, Naruto. I only got the last one sold 10 minutes ago. Naruto gave her a confused look and said, Who would have bought it? All my friends have already given me their gifts, even ones that weren't even here. The Lord of Fire stepped up beside Tenten and put his massive hand on her shoulder. I was going to give you something else, but your entrepreneurial friend here told me about something else you might want. He walked up to him and held out the last kunai in the set. You never did take a momentary reward for ending the 4th Great Shinobi War. The royal family was always looking for just such a chance to reward you for that. On behalf of the royal family, the 5 great ninja nations and even the samurai lords, I have been given the honor of presenting you with the last one, he said as he placed the last on in the case and closed it. Naruto was overwhelmed and humbled as he stared at the black case in his hands. Thank you everyone, he said very honestly. Hinata let Hanabi go. Hanabi was trying to hide her annoyance as she returned to her place at Naruto's side. Master, why was I not allowed to see what they were putting in the box? She said with a hint of warning in her voice as everyone smiled at her. Naruto sighed and turned to her. In his eyes it was clear that he was still trying to take everything in. He looked at her with a humble look and said, Because what they gave me isn't for me. It's for you. Hanabi gave a confused look as he held the case up in front of her. I wanted to get them for you on my own as more than just a winter solstice gift. I wanted to get them for you because you became my disciple. I wanted them to be a gift from master to disciple. I could only afford 3 of them at the time and wanted Tenten to hold the rest until I could buy them. Tenten over there had other plans it seems and told all my friends about them. Now this is a gift not only from me, but from everyone. I know you will use them well, he said kindly. She was slightly confused as she opened the case. Inside were 15 gleaming cobalt blue kunais with runes on them. Her eyes went wide and she slowly dragged her fingers across them as disbelief. She blinked blankly at them and asked, Are these what I think they are, master? Naruto nodded his head and said, Yes, they are kunai spirit markers. This is your set and unlike the Flying Thunder God, only you can use these. She fought back her tears and closed the box with her head held down. She handed the box to Hinata and embraced Naruto with all her strength. Thank you, master, I don't know what else to say but thank you, she said shakily as she buried her face in his chest. Everyone clapped for her as Kakashi snapped a picture of them. Hayashi and Tsunade stood in the front of the room before the band as he said, It seems the gift-giving part of the celebration ran slightly longer than expected. It is only 6 minutes until midnight and the close of the celebration. Please take your dance partner hand for the celebratory dance, he said as he took Lady Tsunade's hand and placed his other on her hip. he said quietly to her. I can't believe the Lord of Fire didn't take my advice and ask you to dance. She smiled dangerously at him and said, You are the host Hayashi and the only single man of stature near my own here. Don't complain or I'll drag you out to drink white light gold again. He swallowed hard with a strained expression on his face and said, Yes, Hokagesima. Choji partnered up with Ino and Shikamaru took Kurenai's hand with a sour look on his face. Great, now she's gonna harp on me about my bad dancing, he said to Choji. Choji laughed quietly. Tenten saw Lee go over and sit down gloomily. She looked at him and felt his pain. Tenten went over to Sakura as several guys were trying to ask her to dance and whispered in her ear. Hayashi has been keeping a much closer eye on me and Niji. I think he suspects that we are dating. Go ask Niji to dance and I'll ask Lee so he doesn't feel left out. Sakura smiled at her. None of the girls dared to approach Naruto as Hanabi clung tightly to him. She would give anyone that got close to them the evil eye. Hanabi watched Konohamaru nervously looking over to the corner where the largest gathering of single guys were. They were all trying to get a dance with Hinata. She refused them all, and as the crowd around her thinned out, Konohamaru looked over at Hanabi. She gave him a very stern look and pointed sharply at Hinata. He hung his head and approached her. Sorry, Konohamaru, I'm not really in a dancing mood, she said in a tired tone. The other guys drooling over her seemed to already turn her off to the idea. Konohamaru scratched the back of his head nervously and said, Ah, I see. Well, did you at least like the necklace I got for you? I noticed you were wearing it. She looked over at him in surprise and said, You got me this necklace? Why didn't you give it to me yourself then? I partly made it with the Rasengan and I'm not really that good with girls, he admitted nervously as he wrung his hands. I wanted to give it to you, but I got cold feet and asked your butler to give it to you instead, he said. She smiled shyly at him as he said, Do you mind if I sit next to you, since you don't feel like dancing? Hinata bit her lips together innocently and said, I have a better idea. She took his hand and stood up. I'd prefer to dance with you instead, Sage Konohamaru. Really? He stuttered in shock. Sakura's jaw almost hit the floor when she saw Hinata get up to dance with Konohamaru. She was so stunned she almost ran into Niji on the other side of the room. He gave her a curious and slightly flat look. Was there something you needed? He asked carefully. Sakura thought fast and smiled slyly at him. It seems all the sages are dancing with Hyugas tonight. I didn't want to be left out, she said suggestively with a coy look. He looked over at Tenten taking the floor with Lee and smiled. He presented his hand to her and said, Very well then. She took his hand and whispered to him, Don't worry, Tenten sent me. I already knew that, he replied softly as he grabbed her hip and her right hand. Hayashi nodded to the band to start the music and the lights were turned down low. A slow dance tune was played as Hayashi and Lady Tsunade started everyone off. Choji showed that he really was a noble and danced with Ino with ease and grace despite his size. Konohamaru was sweating bullets as Hinata was trying to lead them in dancing awkwardly. Shikamaru had that kill me and get it over with look on his face, but Kurenai still managed to enjoy herself. Niji and Sakura easily proved to be the best on the floor as Niji showed her he wasn't only a perfectionist in battle. Easily the worst dancer on the floor was none other than Rock Lee. His movements were too jerky, nervous, and awkward to follow. Tenten yelped twice in the first few moments and he had to lead her over to a chair so she could rest her hurt foot. Naruto obviously had never danced before and only wrapped his arms around Hanabi and swayed slightly side to side while turning in a circle. Hanabi certainly knew how to dance, but wasn't intent on showing him. She had both her hands and her face lying on his chest with her eyes closed, enjoying the moment. Niji stole a quick word as they spun Sakura around. That's not a very noble way to dance, Hanabi, he said knowingly. She never even opened her eyes and said, Who are you to tell the future Hyuga clan head and the future 6th Hokage what is noble? He smiled as Sakura smiled at him and said, I think she's got you there. Naruto closed his eyes and let himself enjoy the moment of holding Hanabi. As the song wore on, Hanabi felt like she was dancing on a cloud, but never opened her eyes, thinking she would wake up and it would have all been a dream. They were so encompassed with each other and the moment that they never noticed most of the rest of the couples had stopped dancing. Most of the people in the room were watching Naruto and Hanabi dancing 10 feet off the ground as the wind spun them ever so slight. Neji was still holding Sakura's hand as they both leaned up against the far wall watching the couple. Sakura watched the sweet looks on both their faces for a touching moment. She turned to Neji and said slightly sarcastically with a smile, Here, I thought you would stay out there. He looked over at her and said, I learned to dance with expert timing because I'm a noble and it is expected of me. I also learned when someone of greater skill is near you that you should leave the floor to give them room. I can hardly compare to the master of wind. He watched them quietly. You know, I always thought of them as an odd couple, she said as she watched them in wonder. Niji's eyes never left the slow-spinning couple in the middle of the room dancing on air. That's funny. I always thought they were the perfect couple, he said honestly. The Lord of Fire nodded his head in agreement from beside them as he looked down at the Hokage scroll in his hand. Even though I really wanted to give this to Great Sage tonight, I think tonight has been memorable enough for him. I'll leave it with the Hokage and let her to give it him when she feels it is the right time, he thought. The last lingering note of the song rang out as Hanabi and Naruto lightly touched down on the floor. Hanabi clutched at his sides and softly said, Please, don't stop. If you do, I'll wake up and it will all have been a dream. Naruto was in his kitchen making tea late at night. He poured the tea into 2 small cups and set it on a tray. He silently went upstairs and knocked on Sakura's door. Come in, she said as he opened the door. Naruto walked into her room holding the tray of steaming tea. Sakura was sitting at her desk reading the book Hanabi had given her for the winter solstice. Next to her desk was a pile of gifts she had received from the celebration earlier that night. She was wearing a thick red nightgown and turned to Naruto when he entered. Hey Sakura, I thought you might want some tea, he said with a hint of tiredness in his voice. She looked over to him and stretched. She looked over at her clock and rubbed her eyes. Wow, it's already 3 in the morning. I'm glad tomorrow is my day off, she said as Naruto came over to her and she took one of the cups. How is Hanabi? She asked as she took a sip of tea. Naruto took the other cup and set the tray on her desk. She fell asleep as soon as her head hit the pillow, he said as he took a seat on her bed near the desk. How about you, can't sleep? He asked her quietly. She shook her head at him with a slight smile. No, not really, so much has happened tonight. It was a very memorable night, especially for you two. You two looked so sweet dancing together. I know I wasn't the only one in the room that was a bit envious of you guys, she said as she looked over at him knowingly. Naruto nodded his head with his thoughts far away as he held his cup with both hands in his lap and looked at the floor. Yeah, I guess so, he said quietly. Sakura gave him a concerned look and said, What's on your mind? You have never come to my bedroom this late at night. He nodded his head and sighed. He turned to her and reached into his overcoat. He pulled out a small white box and handed it to her. She took it and gave him a confused look as she set her book down. What is this? She asked. He shrugged. It's the real gift I got you. I didn't want to give it to you in front of Hanabi just in case she took it the wrong way, he said as he stared off into the wall. She looked at it in slight confusion before she opened the small box. Inside it was a gold bracelet with a single teardrop pearl on it. She looked over to him in surprise and said, This looks just like the one you gave to Lady Tsunade. He gave her a weak smile and said, Yeah, I guess it does. Sakura gave him a kind look as she slowly set the small box on her desk. Naruto, what's wrong? She said softly. He shook his head to clear his thought. I've just got a lot on my mind, Sakura-kun. I've got some things to take care of and I'm running out of time," he admitted sadly as he stared into his tea. Sakura flinched and looked away. "Naruto, don't think I don't know what you were talking about. Sasuke told me everything after I got back from my sage training," she said worriedly. "Then you know what I mean when I tell you that I went out and did chakra training tonight?" he asked without looking at her. She turned to him, but couldn't look him in the eyes. "Yes, you fought the nine-tailed fox. What happened?" she asked. He sighed and then admitted. "She handed me my butt again and in record time. I used to be able to last 6 hours and tonight she beat me in less than 15 minutes. I just feel like I've stumbled backwards when my time is already growing short," he said with a lost look on his face. She set her tea down and returned her look to his eyes. "Naruto, you are the child of destiny and you already saved the world from ruin. It's been peaceful for almost 4 years now. You shouldn't worry so much. You always pull through in the end," she said empathetically. He shook his head at the floor and said with sad resolution, "No, Sakura, that prophecy has yet to unfold. This is the calm before the storm." "Naruto! Please stop talking like that, it's so unlike you. You already saved the world, you didn't destroy it," she said desperately. Naruto looked at her and unhinged his eyes. They went from deep brown to red with cat-slit pupils in the span of a heartbeat. He held up his hand and summoned a red flame of chakra that radiated hate, anger, and pride. He stared at brilliant red chakra flame dancing in his hand for a long moment. Sakura turned away with tears in her eyes as he said in a lost manner, Have I really, Sakura-kun? The nine-tailed fox is as scornful as ever and the body of Jubi the ten-tailed beast is still sealed within the moon. Even if the fox was sealed away forever, each year it is said the moon gets closer to us. One day it will come crashing into the world and destroy everything." Sakura gave him a stunned look of shock and said, You can't really mean after you defeat the nine-tailed fox you intend to go to the moon and fight what is left of the ten-tailed beast? Naruto, that is just crazy. No one could do that." He released his chakra flame and his eyes shifted back. Naruto set his tea on her desk and pulled his legs up as wrapped his arms around his knees. "I know, that's what I keep telling myself," he said in a lost manner. Sakura stood up and walked over to him. She placed her hand on his shoulder as he looked at the wall of her bedroom. "Naruto, you don't need to put the problems of the whole world on your shoulders and no one person can do everything, not even you," she said softly. He put his head on his knees and soullessly said, "I don't have a choice, Sakura, this is all up to me. And I'm just not sure if I can do it anymore." Sakura remembered all the times Naruto had helped her. When she was too weak, Naruto had always helped her. Again and again her memories showed her the times he rushed headlong into battle to protect her. Conviction shined in her eyes. "Naruto, if you're worried about the fighting Kyuubi, then I will help you. Hanabi and Konohamaru will be there for you as well." He shook his head on his knees and said, "No, you can't help me, neither can they. I'll be standing in the fox's chakra. You know what that chakra does to a person." She winced and turned away. She vividly remembered how extensive the damage to him was when he fought Orochimaru and Four Tails came out. "Hanabi and Konohamaru aren't the only ones that became a sage for you. Don't tell me I can't help you. I'm not going to let it be like all those times before where you did everything by yourself. I'm strong too now," she nearly yelled to him. Naruto picked up his head and looked over at her with a sad, meek expression. "I know you're strong, Sakura-kun, but I will not put the people I care about most in danger. I wouldn't be able to live with myself if you got killed because of me. This is something I have to deal with on my own. That's what it means to be a Jinchuriki in the end. It means to be alone," he said sadly. Sakura wanted to refute him, but after a long moment of thought she knew he was right even though she didn't want to admit it. "What about the lightning element? Sasuke told me you were trying to learn it for some jutsu of Rakuto the Moon Sage," she said quietly. Naruto shook his head and said, It's no good. Even after so much training I can't use the lightning element no matter how hard I try. Sakura grabbed her arms and looked down. There has to be something else you could use. Naruto nodded his head solemnly and said, There is, but I wouldn't survive either. I believe I can win in the end, I'm just not sure if I'll make it back. Sakura teared up again and said, Naruto, you can't really mean that. The next morning Naruto, Hanabi and Konohamaru were training at Training Ground 36. Snow blanketed the ground and hung thick on the branches of the trees. Naruto had hundreds of clones out training all over the grounds. Konohamaru had cleared away the snow on the ground in a 50-feet area so that he and Hanabi could spar. Hanabi was having a hard time adjusting to Konohamaru's new agile fighting style and hadn't managed to land a single effective blow on him. He ducked and weaved at the most awkward angles, avoiding her ever strike. Grr, I hate your new fighting style, Konohamaru, you might even be harder to fight than Rock Lee, she said in frustration as she looked at him with her Byakugan while in her fighting pose. Konohamaru chuckled at her knowingly as he relaxed his pose slightly. Well, that's the way of the monkey for you. Hanabi surged forward and landed a hard open palm strike in the center of his chest. Konohamaru crumpled to the ground as he struggled to breathe. Konohamaru, you really shouldn't drop your guard like that when you're fighting Hanabi, Naruto said in a warning voice as he looked up from the scroll he was reading. Konohamaru took several sharp breaths and he got to his knees and threw his head back as he took in a deep breath. He sarcastically said, Thanks for the advice, master. Naruto rolled his eyes at him and said, Why don't you two call it for the day? It's already after 11 o'clock anyway. Hanabi is going to be training with Sakura for the rest of the day and you still need to show me what all you have learned from the Monkey Clan. Konohamaru rose slowly to his feet and said to Hanabi, Don't be too proud of your lucky shot you landed on me. I'll make sure you don't land another one on me tomorrow. Hanabi laughed as she smiled at him. There is no such thing as a lucky shot, Konohamaru, but we are ninjas, not samurais. You should be weary of losing your focus. I will say, however, that you have gotten much better at dodging, but you didn't even try to hit me. Why? Are you scared I might break? She said with obvious amusement. He shook his head and said, No, I know better than that. I was using the match to test my agility. Hanabi chuckled softly and said, You know, the more I fight you, the better I'll get at hitting you. If you keep only going for defense, then you'll just end up as my punching bag. Konohamaru laughed and said, Yeah, I know. That was just for today. Tomorrow I'll fight back and you might even be surprised at how much I've improved. Hanabi smiled back and then turned to Naruto. I'm going to stop by the Hyuga compound and a few other places to set some kunai markers. I'll meet Sakura-kun for lunch afterwards. She turned back to Konohamaru and said, Oh, and Konohamaru. In the blink of an eye she snatched a kunai from her holster and hurled at Konohamaru's face. Konohamaru didn't even try to dodge it and caught it less than an inch from it, piercing his right eye. Hanabi smiled at him and softly said, Catch. He chuckled unknowingly and said, Hey, what was that for? You're still pretty dense, Konohamaru. You might want to look at the kunai a bit more closely, Naruto said with obvious amusement in his voice. Konohamaru flipped the kunai over in his hand. It was cobalt blue with brighter blue runes on it. He blinked a few times in realization. Wait, you're giving this to me? He said in blank shock. She smiled at him and said, Yes. This way, if you ever need my help, I'll be able to get to you. But I thought you were only supposed to give these out to the most important people to you? I mean, are you really sure? You only have like 5 of these to give out, he said in disbelief as he stared at the kunai. She nodded her head a few times and said, Yes, I am sure, Konohamaru. Of all the kunai spirit markers I have to give out, I'm the most sure about that one. He scratched the back of his head and thought. I thought for sure you'd give them all out to members of your clan, thank you, Hanabi-kun, he said honestly. Hanabi waved at Naruto and then leaped away. The real Naruto stood up from the tree he was sitting next to and rolled the scroll up that he was reading. He tucked it away in his pouch and dispelled all his clones with a loud pop. Konohamaru gave him a questioning look and then asked, "Hey, I thought we were going to spar. That's why I didn't use any chakra when I fought Hanabi." Naruto tossed him a knowing grin as he started walking toward the street. "We are, but you know we can't use any high-ranking jutsu at this training ground." Konohamaru quickened his pace to catch up to him and asked carefully, "So where are we going then?" Naruto tilted his head to the side and looked up and thought, "To a more secure training ground." Konohamaru's eyes lit up with excitement and he raised his fist over his head with a cheer. "Yeah! Woohoo! I'm finally going to get to see the Hokage training ground." Naruto laughed softly before saying, "Well, that's not totally untrue." Konohamaru slowly lowered his hand as his smile faded to a curious look. "What do you mean?" he asked intently. "We aren't going to the current Hokage training ground. We are going to the previous Hokage training ground," he said as his feet crunched through the 2 inches of snow on the ground. "Wait, there is more than one Hokage training ground?" he asked. Naruto nodded his head and said, "Yes, there was 3 total, but 1 has been destroyed. Even I don't know how it happened, but I suspect it was the 4th Hokage that was to blame for it. We are going to the 2nd Hokage training ground. It's where the 3rd Hokage, your grandfather, trained after the 4th Hokage died." He blinked a few times in shock and then shook his head. "Wait, what's it like?" Naruto gave him a knowing smile and said, "It takes quite a few ninjas to run that training ground. We call it 2. You'll see what it's like shortly." Naruto led him almost an hour's walk out of the village into the middle of the woods. The trees and vines were so thick in the area that he was sometimes forced to crawl under them. After getting through a particularly dense area, they came into a small open clearing at the base of a huge tree at least 6 feet in diameter. There was no snow in the clearing and it was dimmer than the rest of the woods as the large branches of the tree cast a cold shadow over the area. Yamato was standing next to the tree trunk with his back leaning on the tree. He peered up at them and said, "You're 20 minutes late." He stood forward and faced the tree. He made a hand sign and said, "Secret jutsu of opening." The trunk of the tree seemed to grow apart for a long moment until a doorway was revealed. He waved them forward and said, "The Hokage is late as well. You sages just can't ever seem to show up on time." They stepped into a 5 feet circular area inside the trunk of the tree and the opening closed behind them. Konohamaru was looking around in confusion just before the ground under them lurched and started moving down. He nearly lost his balance as he grabbed onto the wall for support. "I shouldn't have to tell you this, Konohamaru, but you can't ever talk to anyone about this training ground," Yamato warned him sternly. Konohamaru gave him a slightly offended look and said, "Hey, I'm not stupid, even I know that much." They went down for what seemed like forever until the floor finally stopped at a small opening. They stepped out into a wide hallway that was lit from the ceiling. The hallway went straight for 50 feet and then it gently sloped down. They walked for another 10 minutes until they came to the end of the hall. At the end of the hall was a giant 20-foot tall and wide heavy steel vault door with 2 umbu guards standing in front of it. On the front of the giant door was a huge seal that read barrier. To the left on the giant door were 2 normal doors right next to each other. There isn't really much to explain here. The door to our left is the control room that will be maintained by 6 umbu, Yamato said while pointing his open hand at the closest door to the left giant steel door. There will be 5 umbu using their chakra and jutsu to control every aspect of the training ground. The last umbu is the observer that takes a record of the jutsu and sparring matches that are held here. He turned to the giant steel door and pointed at it with his open hand. As you might have guessed already, this is the entrance to the training grounds. Konohamaru eyed the remaining normal-looking door curiously and asked as he pointed at it, "What's behind that door then?" Yamato's eyes suddenly shifted back and forth eerily as he inched closer to the door. He ominously said, "What is behind this door? Is a closely guarded secret of the umbu." It is guarded night and day year-round, and only those in the highest level of the Umbu know of it. He walked over to the door and placed his hand on the doorknob. He turned his head slowly and gave Konohamaru an evil and dreading look. Konohamaru backpedaled to the far wall and pressed his back against it in uncomfortable fear as he eyed the door with a foreboding look. Something of unspeakable horror lives behind this door, he said with wide eyes as he turned the knob and the door creaked slowly open. Konohamaru started sweating profusely as the door opened. Nothing could be seen inside the pitch-black room besides the darkness. "It's," he said with intensity in his eyes. "It's," Yamato said as he reached his arm just inside the door with a look of horror on his face. Konohamaru shielded his face with his arm like some terrible demon was about to come out of the door and devour him whole in fear. Yamato flipped the light switch to the room as Tsunade said in a tired tone from behind them. "The bathroom." "Ah! Wait. What?" Konohamaru suddenly opened his eyes and threw his arm down from shielding his face. He looked intently inside the small room. Inside the small room was a white toilet and a sink and nothing else. Konohamaru's look changed to one of offense. "What the hell? What was with all the build-up and doom and gloom crap, Yamato?" He yelled at him as he threw his arms down. Yamato held his pointer finger up wisely with a smile and said, "Personal hygiene after using the restroom is serious business, Konohamaru. There's only one bathroom down here and to use it poorly means to infect others with your germs and stench. Please remember to give a courtesy flush when going number 2 and always wash your hands." Konohamaru clenched his teeth and fist in anger at the joke Yamato had played on him for a long moment and then finally relaxed. His arms fell limply to his sides as he shook his head. "Fine, whatever," he said as he headed for the giant steel door and the two Umbu opened it for him quickly. He walked inside without another word. He has much better control over his temper, I see," he said as Tsunade walked over to Naruto. "Remember, this isn't like the other training ground. Don't get too serious in there," she warned him. He gave her a slightly smile and said, "I know, mother, I know." 2 days later, Naruto and Hanabi had already eaten breakfast and were walking up the door of his estate. There was still snow on the ground and it was still very cold outside, yet the sun shined brightly in the morning chill. Naruto and Hanabi were dressed in heavy sage uniforms as they went through the entrance. Naruto opened the dungeon-like door for her and they both went out. "Hanabi," he said. She gave him a curious look. "Yes, master?" she asked him questioningly. "I've got a few things to take care of this morning. Please go to the training grounds without me," he said. Her eyes narrowed at him as she walked right up to him and curiously said, "What kind of things?" Naruto rolled his eyes at her and said, "I'll be back in time for lunch." Hanabi scowled at him and said, "You still didn't answer the question, Naruto," she warned him. He smiled at her as he leaped away. She snarled at his back in annoyance as he left. Hanabi arrived at Training Ground 36 a few minutes later, where Konohamaru was already practicing throwing the Rasengan. He no longer wore his long scarf ninja outfit. His new sage outfit was a dark green and had the symbol of the monkey clan in red over his heart. On the back it had a much larger Monkey Clan symbol covering his back. He wore black pants and sandals with it. Konohamaru turned to her when she entered the training area and said, "Morning, where is Naruto?" Hanabi gave him a slightly annoyed look and said, "He said he'd be here after lunch. Is there any progress with your training?" Konohamaru sighed and said, "No, this is ridiculously hard. I was hoping Naruto would be here to help me today." Hanabi put up the seal of the tiger and summoned 6 shadow clones. They fanned out and started sparring with each other. "Yeah, I know. He's supposed to help me get used to using the yellow flash jutsu with my new kunais as well," she said sourly. There was an awkward silence between them for a moment before Hanabi asked, "Have you talked to Hinata since the party?" He looked down in disappointment and said, "No, I tried to invite her to lunch the following day, but she had already been sent out on a mission. She smiled knowingly at him and said, "When is she supposed to be back?" Early today if things went well on their mission. It was just a standard protection mission," he said shyly. "Of all the people in the village, I never imagined that you'd be the type that would go for Hinata, especially after all the things Naruto must have told you about her," she said. He gave her an embarrassed look and then shrugged. "So, she is a little insecure. That still doesn't mean she doesn't have any good qualities." Hanabi laughed slightly at his shyness and said, "How did things go after you two danced? You looked really stiff out there with her. I'm surprised you even noticed us as glued to Naruto as you were," he told her knowingly. Hanabi smiled at him as he said, "I was pretty nervous after we danced and could hardly talk to her. I hope I didn't make a bad impression." Hanabi looked up in thought and then teasingly said, I don't know, your dancing was pretty horrible." He shot her a flat, worried look and said, "Come on, don't pick on me right now. I never did that to you." Hanabi laughed again and said, "It's nice to know that Naruto and I aren't the only ones with problems. Are you going to invite her out on a date when she gets back?" He looked down and sighed. Don't know. I mean, she might not be too tired after her mission and all." Hanabi gave him a sour look and said, "Stop being a chicken. You'll never get on good terms with her if you back away like that. Just ask her out to eat when you see her again." He gave her a worried look and said, "I'll try, but it's kind of hard for me to be myself around her. I'm always so nervous." He wrung his hands. She giggled and tried to cover it with her hand. "You know Hinata should be the shy one. You are the grandson of the third Hokage and you are only one of 5 people in the village with the rank of sage. You should have more confidence in yourself," she told him compassionately. Konohamaru looked up at her in thought and said, "Yeah, maybe you're right. Hey, if she says anything about me, could you let me know?" She gave him an evil grin and said, "What's it worth to you?" Konohamaru stared at her in blank shock just before she busted up laughing. "I was kidding, Konohamaru. Of course I'll tell you if she asks about you. I can't believe you thought I was serious." Konohamaru relaxed and then he gave her an annoyed look that faded away quickly. "I guess I deserved that for the prank I pulled on you when we were out shopping." She looked at him thoughtfully for a moment and then said, "Actually, I had forgotten about that." Konohamaru just shook his head in his hands and said, "You're just like Naruto, not a prankster until the very end." Hanabi smiled in agreement just as one of her clones landed a straight strike at the center on the other clone's chest, popping it. She looked over as it dissipated and then turned back to him with a casual look before saying, "Looks like that's my cue to get back to training." She stood up to go spar with her free clone as Konohamaru went back to his own training. Konohamaru summoned the Rasengan and threw it. It got just over 5 feet from his hand and then dissipated with a small gust of wind. He was just getting set to try it again when Hanabi suddenly started looking around intently. "Huh? What is it, Hanabi?" he asked curiously and seriously. She eyed a cluster of trees 100 feet to the north of them and said, "Someone is heading toward us. I'm not sure who it is, but they are pretty close to us. My chakra sensory skills aren't as good as Naruto's, so I'm not sure who it is, but one thing is for sure. It is definitely not a member of the Hyuga clan." She and her clones jumped into a nearby tree to conceal themselves as Konohamaru jumped onto another tree branch. They waited silently for many long tense moments until they heard the crunch of snow and then a dragging sound slowly over and over again. They watched as the sound slowly grew louder and louder. A man with ash-black hair and a red mark on each of his cheeks appeared near the north end of the training ground. He looked terribly exhausted and he was clutching a wound on his stomach as he had his arm on the trunk of a tree for support. There was a kunai embedded in his left shoulder and a freely bleeding gash on his right leg. They faintly heard him say, "Two could not have sworn I heard voices." He winced as he tried to move forward, dragging his hurt leg. He only made it another 2 steps before collapsing face first into the snow. A gust of wind howled as they finally recognized him. "It's Kiba Hanabi," Konohamaru said as he jumped down and started heading over to him. Hanabi dispelled her clones and followed him before saying, "I know, and he is hurt." She looked at him with concern. They quickly reached him and Konohamaru went to turn him over. "Stop, Konohamaru. Let me do it. I am a trained medic now." Konohamaru stepped to the side worriedly as Hanabi carefully turned Kiba to his side as to not force the kunai in his shoulder any deeper in. He was breathing in shallow breaths and his eyes didn't seem to be focusing on anything. His face was dirty and his clothes were ripped up like he had been in a serious battle. "Kiba, can you hear me?" she said loudly as she began healing the gash in his leg. He looked up at her and reached out to touch her face with his trembling hand. Konohamaru looked at him in disbelief and said, "Who could have done this to Kiba?" "Hinata?" he said, and then suddenly coughed loudly a few times as a spurt of blood came out of each of his nostrils. "How did you escape?" he said, trying to focus his vision on her. "It's not Hinata, Kiba. It is me, Hanabi. How did this happen and what's going on with my sister?" she said calmly as she moved to heal his face. Konohamaru looked changed to blank horror. Kiba spoke in a raspy, pained voice. "We erg." He clutched his chest in pain for a long moment until Hanabi healing took effect and he breathed a bit easier. "We were almost home when we got attacked by two men. One of them was tall with spiky brown hair and the other was a smaller skinny blonde guy. They had set up an ambush for us. Traps went off as we neared the village. Shino got hit with a gas trap that knocked him out. Not even his bugs were moving. I never even smelled them before they were already on us. I got too close to a paper bomb trap and ended up like this." Konohamaru looked at him frantically. "What about Hinata?" He coughed up blood and said, "They attacked me first and I couldn't stand up to them. They got me, but they were taking care not to seriously hurt Hinata. I think they planned to take her captive. Please help her. I'm begging you." Hanabi gave Konohamaru a worried look. "We need to get him to someone more medically trained than me. We can't just leave him. He's too badly injured." Angered resolve set into his eyes. "Don't worry, we won't have to. Shadow Clone Jutsu." He summoned a clone and helped Kiba to his feet. "Take him to the Hyuga compound and tell them to notify the Umbu about what's happened." The clone put Kiba on his back and headed off. Konohamaru turned around and said, "We have to hurry. Maybe we can catch them before they get too far away." He leaped away. Hanabi worriedly said, "Good thinking sending him to the Hyuga compound as it's closer than the hospital, but how will you find Shino and Hinata?" Konohamaru kept looking at the ground as he leaped through the trees. "Kiba left us a trail of blood," he said as Hanabi looked down. There were drops of blood and his odd step and drag marks in the snow. Konohamaru flipped and moved through the trees with all the speed and grace of a real monkey. He was moving so fast, in fact, that even Hanabi was having trouble keeping up with him. It didn't take them long to get to the end of the trail and Konohamaru gave her the signal to stop as he landed on a tree limb. They entered a small clearing where several traps had already been set off. There were the scorch marks of a paper bomb trap on a nearby tree. A small broken vial was lying on the ground near another tree. He surveyed the area for a moment. "There's the gas trap Kiba was talking about, but I don't see Shino. Hanabi, can you sense anyone near here?" he asked with worry in his voice. Hanabi closed her eyes and reached out in all directions with her chakra. She suddenly opened her eyes and said, "Yes, there is someone just on the other side of that tree near the broken bottle." Konohamaru went to jump down into the area and Hanabi caught him by the arm. "Konohamaru, you can't just blindly go wandering around down there. There are likely more traps set up to cover their retreat," she said seriously. "Gur, we can't just sit around up here all day. Hinata and Shino are in trouble," he said frustratedly. "I know, I'm worried about them too," she told him empathetically. "Byakugan." Her temples bulged as she looked around the area. Traps were everywhere. There are a lot of traps still out there. There are paper bomb traps all over the middle of the trees. Follow me, I'll lead us down to the person behind the tree, she said as she carefully picked a path over to the tree by the broken vial. They flanked the tree and came around its trunk with kunais drawn. Shino was slumped up against the back of the tree. He looks uninjured, she said as she kneeled down and turned her ear toward his mouth. Konohamaru turned around and picked the broken vial. He is breathing. He may have just been knocked out. She placed her hand on his chest and started pouring healing chakra into him. Konohamaru walked back over to her and sniffed the vial and then wrinkled his nose up in disgust. I don't know what was in this thing, but it smells awful, he said. She took the vial with her free hand and smelled it for herself. It's ranitidine oil, but it's a powerfully sedative, she said as Shino's bugs started crawling up his neck toward his face. Konohamaru looked around angrily and said, why would they take Hinata of all people? Hanabi flinched slightly and said, I'd like to tell you for ransom, but it's highly unlikely they took her for that reason. They probably took her because they want her eyes. They are after the Hyuga clan's Byakugan. She looked down sadly. What? What do you mean? He asked worriedly. This isn't the first time something like this has happened, Konohamaru. She was almost taken when she was 5 too. We have to take steps to protect the Byakugan. There are many that would try to steal it from us, she said quietly. He looked at her in blank shock. You mean they are going to cut out her eyes and use them themselves? It's very likely that is what they are, she said as Shino stirred and groaned. He opened his eyes and looked at Hanabi for a confused moment. His eyes suddenly flew open and he asked, where are Kiba and Hinata? Are they okay? Konohamaru's clone took Kiba to get treatment and we just got here and found you. What can you tell us about the ones that took Hinata? He leaned forward and grabbed his aching head. The taller one is a taijutsu user that also uses the earth element. The short skinny guy is a trap maker and I didn't get to see any of his jutsu. I couldn't fight after they set off that gas trap and Kiba was totally outclassed by the larger guy. They took Hinata and headed north, he said as he tried to stand. Hanabi grabbed his shoulder and said, no, you should stay down for a while, Shino. She looked over at him as he righted himself and said, I'm the one in charge of this mission. It's my job to get her back to the village safe and sound. Do not worry, my bugs are already freeing me from their drugs' effects. Konohamaru looked at him and said, Shino, I know this is your squad, but you're only going to slow us down if you come. We have to hurry. Shino adjusted his sunglasses. Indeed we do, he said suggestively. Hanabi turned to Konohamaru and gave him a concerned look. Konohamaru, fine. But if you fall behind, we are leaving you, he said in agitation. Hanabi, can you track them using your Byakugan? I'll try, she said as she activated her Byakugan and looked around for a moment. That will not be necessary. I've got a beetle planted on Hinata. My bugs will lead us there, Shino said. Hanabi turned to Konohamaru and said, it is no good, they must be out of range, but they went north of here. There are a few traps up ahead, but they shouldn't be hard to avoid. Shino, are you sure about coming with us? You really should go to the hospital for treatment. Konohamaru scampered up a tree and started flipping through the air at a swift speed. Shino turned to look at her for a moment, then leaped into the trees to follow him. Hanabi sighed and followed. Shino was obviously straining to keep up with them and even almost fell twice. He was starting to breathe heavily. After 20 minutes, he suddenly said, they are near. My male beetles are getting antsy. Yes, I see the bigger guy now. He has Hinata slung over his shoulder. He has her bound and gagged, but I don't see the other guy anywhere. This could be a trap, she said. Konohamaru had determination in his eyes as he said, then I'll spring their trap and get them first. He started moving much faster through the trees, leaving Hanabi and Shino behind. He's an idiot. We should stick together and attack as a group, Shino said and then sighed. Hanabi kept pace with Shino as she worriedly watched Konohamaru fade away into the distance. Konohamaru was moving through the trees at a blinding speed until he caught sight of the large muscular man wearing all black with Hinata on his shoulder. He was bounding through the tree as Konohamaru was quickly gaining on him. He leaped at the man in black and was less than 10 feet away when the man pulled out 2 kunai and threw them out to either of his sides. Konohamaru's eyes went wide as he suddenly saw why. The kunais both hit trees, and in the center of them on a wire was a smoking paper bomb that Konohamaru was just about to fly into. Shit! He thought as he forced his entire body to relax. Move with the blow just like Raichi taught me to. His back was just over the bomb when it exploded violently. His body moved with the blast contorting at seemingly impossible angles. He was thrown up through the trees, and it took him a brief second to right his body. He grabbed a tree limb with his upward momentum and flipped completely over it. He rocketed down toward a man in black in a flying jump kick that shattered the branch he was about to land on. Konohamaru landed on his feet in the woods, and the other man landed near him. The larger ninja set Hinata by a tree and turned back to Konohamaru. Well, it seems you didn't take the hint. No matter, I guess I have time to play with you for a bit. The dog breath guy and the bug hive man didn't even give me a decent workout, he said in a deep voice as he stretched out his arm and cracked his neck. He had spiky brown hair, dull green eyes, and a scar running down the left side of his neck from his ear to his collarbone. Konohamaru gritted his teeth in anger and yelled, "You're not going anywhere. You better hand over Hinata if you know what's good for you." The big man laughed. "You weak little leaf ninja are all the same. You talk big, but you never have anything to back it up. Everyone in the other ninja nations knows the leaf is the weakest now. You've all gotten fat by sitting on your laurels." Killing intent poured out of Konohamaru, and he pointed a hateful finger at the ninja. "You! What possible purpose could you have for kidnapping Hinata?" he said as he threw his arm out to his side. The ninja gave him a causal shrug with his hands up and said, "What can I say? Hyuga eyes are worth a lot of money, and we already have a buyer for hers." He reached down and grabbed onto Hinata's limp face from under her jaw as he looked at her. He turned back to look at Konohamaru with a lustful smile and said, "The rest of her is quite nice too. I'm sure what's left of her will sell nicely at the slave market after we transplant her eyes. Well, after we have our fun with her first, that is." Konohamaru's eyes went from anger to rage. "You're never gonna lay a hand on her." He went through several hand signs in the blink of an eye and yelled, "Summoning Jutsu!" A bow staff with golden tips on each end poofed into the air in front of him. He snatched it out of the air as he charged the large man. "Ra!" he yelled as the ninja in black held up a single hand sign. "Mud Wall Jutsu." Konohamaru swung his bow staff over his head and brought it down at the man's head just as a wall of mud formed around him. He hit the shield with a loud smack that sent mud in all directions. He was just bracing himself to pull his staff back and hit the shield again when it suddenly reformed and hardened around his staff in the blink of an eye. The brown mud turned into gray rock. "Haha, you call that a move? I don't know who taught you to be a ninja, but you will have to be a lot more subtle if you ever want to hit me." Konohamaru struggled for a split second to free his staff before a massive fist broke through the rock wall and hit him in the head. He was sent flying 100 feet in the other direction, leaving a cloud of dust behind him as he crashed through the woods. He picked himself up and charged back towards the man. The man was just about to pick the unconscious Hyuga when Konohamaru burst through the undergrowth. "I told you you're not going anywhere." He yelled at him just as Hanabi and Shino landed near him. Hanabi landed on his right side and Shino landed just behind them. "Oh, reinforcements, I see, but your chances of survival just dropped to 0. he said, and then threw his head back and laughed a few times. Konohamaru gritted his teeth and scowled as he drew a kunai. "Quick, get down!" Hanabi yelled as she tackled him to the side just as a blade went over his head from behind. They skidded on the ground as Hanabi righted herself and slid the last few paces backwards on her feet while drawing one of her kunais. Konohamaru looked up from the ground on his rear and said, Hey, what's the big idea, Hanabi? She was standing over him protectively as he glanced at Shino. He was holding a wicked-looking short sword that had a blade that looked more like a saw. What? Shino, what are you doing? Konohamaru said in shocked disbelief. Shino laughed sadistically at him. That's not Shino, Konohamaru. Hanabi yelled. Konohamaru quickly got to his feet and looked at Shino in shock. The large ninja laughed and said, I told you your chances of survival just went down to 0. You aren't the only one that just had reinforcements arrive. Wait. He suddenly stopped in mid-sentence as his eyes went wide while staring at Hanabi. Dao, is that who I think it is? He said as his curious look suddenly turned into an evil grin of lust. Yes, I believe it is. He said in a sneering voice. My, if it isn't Hanabi Hyuga. If memory serves me right, her eyes are worth 10 times as much as her sister's. The would-be Shino poofed and a short man with shoulder-length blonde hair and sulking blue eyes appeared. He wore a blue ninja outfit and had 2 kunai holsters on his left leg. Yes, I believe you're right, and she's even more attractive than her sister. We could probably get twice as much for her body as well as Zorain. Dao said and then threw his head back and laughed manically. He took 2 steps to the side to flank them. Konohamaru put his back to Hanabi's as his hateful eyes bored into Zorain's. Hanabi scowled at Dao and said, You'll never lay a hand on me and I'll make you pay for ever touching my sister. She grabbed 4 cobalt blue kunais from each of her leg holsters and threw them up in the air. They rained down on the area harmlessly. The short blonde man laughed at her. You see, Zorain? I told you the Leaf Village was weak. Their ninja don't even know how to throw a kunai. Hanabi drew the Flying Thunder God Sword as resolve set into Konohamaru's eyes and he put up the seal of the tiger. Shadow Clone Jutsu! Konohamaru yelled, and just as they poofed onto the field, Hanabi disappeared. She reappeared behind Dao instantly and stabbed him through the heart. He eyed the part of the mirror-shined blade with bright blue runes on it that was sticking through his chest and grinned. He poofed into smoke and Hanabi's sword was sticking through a log. Hanabi's face quickly turned into one of shock. There is no way he had time to get off a substitution jutsu. I'm moving through time-space, that could only mean. She thought as her eyes went wide and she pulled her sword free. She quickly turned around and braced her sword. Dao's wicked, jagged sword clashed with hers just before it could split her in 2 from behind. They were locked in a power struggle as Dao smiled at her mockingly. I hope you didn't think you were the only one that could use time/space ninjutsu. All the while 5 of the 7 clones Konohamaru summoned charged Zorain with kunais in each hand as they yelled loudly. Rag! Zorain smiled and put up a earth seal. Earth Wall Jutsu! He said just as all the clones threw their kunais at him. A wall of earth raised out of the ground in front of him as the kunais clanged off of it. The clones stopped for a second 15 feet from the wall as they heard. Mud Bog Jutsu! The Konohamarus wore a look of shock as the ground turned into mud and they sank up to their knees in it. Hardening Jutsu! Zorain yelled from behind the earth wall and the mud turned into gray rock trapping Konohamaru's clones. The clones struggled to get free, but couldn't move. Stone Spike Jutsu! Zorain yelled and a spike of earth shot out of the ground in front of each of the clones, hitting them in the chest. They poofed into smoke as Zorain looked over the earth wall at him and said, I guess Dog Breath and Bug Boy were some of the better ninjas in the village if you're an example of one of the Leaf's average ones. Konohamaru angrily yelled. I'll show you who's average. He dissipated into smoke. Dao said as he looked around. Konohamaru and 2 of his clones were diving down at him head first from the tree behind him. One clone formed the Rasengan in his hand and the other went through several earth hand signed. Monkey Clan Art, Razor Leaf Jutsu! The clone yelled as thousands of leaves fell off of the trees and became hard as steel. They shot down and threatened to encompass him in their deadly gale. Earth Barrier Jutsu! Dao said as he made a hand sign. The broken earth wall surrounded him and Hinata in a sphere as well as part of the tree she was near. The razor-sharp leaves whirled around the Earth's sphere barrier, and then suddenly they all shot straight for it. They buried themselves over an inch into the rock, but no farther. Good, he finally can't see me, Konohamaru thought as his clone dissipated into smoke. Let's see you try to stop this one. Rasengan! He yelled as he rocketed down from the treetops with the whirling ball of brilliant blue energy at blinding speed. He hit the barrier with an ear-shattering crack as the high-speed jutsu cut into the sphere, sending dust and chunks of gray rock in all directions. The large man watched the jutsu pop through his shield. Konohamaru's arm was buried up to his shoulder. He grinned to himself as he said, "An impressive jutsu, but you are still out of reach. Concentrate. Keep the jutsu going." He thought through gritted teeth as he moved the jutsu to his fingertips. Dao held up a hand sign and said, "Earth Explosion Jutsu." The barrier suddenly cracked all over and then exploded violently. Konohamaru was sent flying with all the rest of the debris. He managed to grab a tree branch in flight and swing himself behind the trunk of a tree as deadly jagged rock projectiles slammed into the other side. Hanabi and Zerain had been disappearing and reappearing all over the place. Zerain would disappear and reappear behind Hanabi, then slash at her, only for her to disappear just before being killed and then reappearing behind Zerain to attack him. I can't keep going," she thought as she panted hard while moving through time/space. "I'm running out of chakra too quickly. If I stop, he'll take my head off, but if I keep going at this rate, I'll kill myself through chakra exhaustion. If only something would distract him." The ear-shattering explosion of the Earth barrier was just enough to get Zerain to look in that direction as Hanabi came out of time-space and jumped again back into it. She reappeared on the other side of a nearby tree. She hit the ground with each breath of air burning in her lungs as rocks shot through the air at incredible speeds. One of them hit a large branch near her and cut it free from the tree without ever stopping. Branches and leaves rained down on the forest floor from the destructive jutsu as she struggled to sit up and brace her back on the tree trunk. Konohamaru landed near her. She was sweaty and didn't even have the strength to hold her head upright. He was clearly worried at seeing her so worn out. He kneeled in front of her and put his hands on her shoulders as she gasped for air. "Hanabi, are you okay?" he asked with concern in his voice. She took in several more breaths before finally finding her voice. "Yes. I can't keep this up though. That blonde freak isn't even breathing hard. Catch your breath for a few seconds, Hanabi. After that we can come up with a plan of attack." Hanabi took only as long as she dared to regain her composure. "Do you have any ideas?" he asked her when her breathing started to slow. "Yes, we have to take out that blonde man first. I don't know who he is, but I've never even seen Naruto jump that many times through time/space that quickly. He is the more deadly of the two right now." He looked down in frustration and then turned back to her and asked, "But how? You two were moving so fast I couldn't even see you." Hanabi stood up but was still leaning on the trunk of the tree and said, "We need to separate him from that sword. That is obviously his spirit marker. If we can get it away from him, we may stand a chance of beating him. Then we can double up on the Earth User Ninja." Konohamaru nodded. "I guess that means I'm the bait," he said while pointing at himself with a smile. Hanabi's eyes went wide with horror. "Absolutely not. I would never use you as bait." He cut her off by raising his hand. "Hanabi, this isn't the time to be worrying over my safety. Think about it. This is the only way I can help you take that guy down." Hanabi's face contorted in pain and frustration as she looked away from him. She clearly wanted to refute him, but knew he was right. She let out a long sigh and hung her head. "Please, just promise me you're not going to die out there," she said in defeat. He smiled at her and said, "What could go wrong? I've got Toad Sage Hanabi watching my back." She gave him a weak look and then jumped into the shattered trees. It only took them a few leaps before they could see the battlefield again. They both stopped on tree branches to survey the area. The area inside the Earth Barrier Jutsu seemed to be the only place not affected by the blast. The earth was dug out around the sphere from the blast, and several of the trees near it were shredded and topped. The large earth jutsu user had the blond man's limp body slung over his shoulder as he walked back over to the knocked-out Hinata. Her back was still resting on the stump of the shattered tree. "Great going, little brother. For all your speed and bragging about how you can jump through time/space and you couldn't even avoid the rocks from my jutsu," he said in disgust as he set the man down on the ground near Hinata and looked him over. Zerain had a small head wound behind his right ear that was slowly bleeding. Dao looked at his brother sourly and said to him, "If I have to lug you all the way home while carrying that girl too, you will pay." Konohamaru looked over at Hanabi and quietly said, "This is good news for us. The blonde guy is out of it. You think you can get the other guy with the yellow flash?" Hanabi shook her head and whispered back, "No, I'd likely kill myself if I used it again. I'm still very low on chakra, but if you can keep him distracted for about 30 seconds, I can pop my clone at the training ground that is already meditating in sage mode." Konohamaru gave her an offended, confused look and said, "Wait, why didn't you do that in the first place?" She scowled at him and whispered forcefully, "I was kind of busy trying not to get my head cut off." Konohamaru's eyes suddenly brightened and then he smiled knowingly. "I've got an even better idea." He pulled out a cobalt blue kunai and said, "This is the reason he gave them to us." He drew some of his chakra into the blade as Hanabi gave him a flat, sour look. "Don't tell me this is the first time in the fight you thought you'd use that. They aren't working." "I think the blonde man did something to the area that messed with them." She hissed at him. Konohamaru gave her a shocked look and loudly said, "No way! I thought they—" The large man turned around suddenly from looking his brother over and threw a kunai with an exploding tag on it in the direction of Konohamaru's voice. It hit the tree beside him with a dull thud noise as the tag smoked. Hanabi's eyes went wide and she jumped away deeper into the forest. Konohamaru could only jump towards the clearing to avoid the blast and flipped over to land on his feet facing Dao as it exploded. Konohamaru crouched in a fighting pose as he stared him down. "Okay, Hanabi, your 30 seconds starts now," he thought. Dao gave him a tired look and said, "I hope you didn't think I forgot about you, you little monkey cockroach. You can knock me down, but I'll always get back up. Now that your partner is out of it, we can start back where we left off," he said as put up the seal of the tiger. "Shadow Clone Jutsu!" he yelled and 20 of him appeared on the field when the smoke cleared. "Humph. You really are stupid. You can come at me with 100 clones and the results will still be the same," Dao said as he got into taijutsu form. "I see you're not using UR," Konohamaru started to say before Dao rushed him with blinding speed. Dao covered the distance between them in the blink of an eye and slammed a fist through one of Konohamaru's clones and into the ground with such force it popped 2 of his other clones. Rocks were sent flying from the impact and Konohamaru and his clones all jumped back. Dao slowly pulled his hand out of the 4-foot-large crater he created and got back into form. Konohamaru wore a strained expression on his face as he thought. So much for dragging out the conversation to stall for time. He and his clones surrounded Dao and started attacking. Dao saw though his every plan of attack and was popping his clones in rapid succession with blindingly fast strikes. Konohamaru only had 2 clones left and thought, "Damn, he fights a lot like Rock Lee. There's no way I can even get a shot in on him. I'll have to put some distance between us." Dao rushed him again and took out his last 2 remaining clones with a single roundhouse kick while Konohamaru jumped back into the trees and said, "Shadow Clone Jutsu!" 20 more Konohamarus filled the trees. "The trees will not hide you," Dao said as he rushed a tree. All the Konohamarus threw shurikens at him. He weaved between them and continued his assault. He managed to pop 3 more clones before one caught him in the face with a smoke bomb. Dao coughed and shielded his face with his arm as he leaped back out of the smoke screen. He looked over at the tree clouded in bluish-gray smoke as 2 more smoke bombs went off and doubled the size of the smoke screen. "Grr, this would be so much easier if I didn't have to conserve my chakra. What's taking her so long?" Konohamaru thought as he formed his clones up for a tactical line charging attack. Dao slowly took his arm away from his face and smirked. He formed 2 hand signs and then held his open palm over his head. I told you your clones were no use against me. Earth style, Earth Fisher Jutsu. He yelled as he slammed his hand to the ground, and a 20-foot wide crack in the earth snaked its way from his feet and raised into Konohamaru's smoke screen. The sounds of clones popping and trees crashing to the ground echoed in the forest. Dao stood up from his crouched position and dusted himself off. That should have squashed that little annoying cockroach, he said in annoyance as he turned back to Zoraine and started to walk over to him. The smoke screen was just starting to clear and toppled trees could be seen as he heard the sound of whirling energy getting louder and louder. He snapped back around only to see a fully formed Rasengan burst out of the bluish-gray smoke screen heading right for him as high speed. Dao's eyes went wide in surprise a second before impact. Hanabi was mediating at the base of a tree a few hundred yards away. Okay, keep calm. Konohamaru can handle himself for a while. I've got nothing to worry about, she thought to herself. Reach out in all directions and sense my sage clone just like Naruto taught me. Hanabi concentrated as she reached out and stilled her mind for many long moments. Her mind reached far away and she saw her clone mediating on a tree branch at the Hyuga training ground. She felt its peaceful presence as she reached for it. Her clone dissipated and filled her with its powerful sage chakra. The dark lines around her eyes grew out into sharp points that went from the base of her jaw to the top of her forehead and then crossed at the very top. She could feel and sense everything for miles around her. I can feel 6 chakra signatures in the area. One of them is Konohamaru. Also I can feel Hinata, Shino, and Kiba nearby. Wait, how is Kiba nearby? He was too injured to fight, but his chakra levels feel like they are normal. What's going on? She thought in confusion while still mediating with her eyes closed. The last 2 chakras have to be that of the 2 that attacked us. But wait, I know those chakras, she thought as she opened her eyes with an annoyed look on her face. I'm going to get you for this, she said under her breath soaked with venom. She raced through the trees until she came to the outskirts of the clearing they were fighting in moments before. She braced her back on a tree trunk and looked over to where Konohamaru was fighting Dao. There was smoke covering the trees to her left and Dao was snapping back around as a Rasengan came flying out of the smoke at him. Dao's eyes went wide and then he sidestepped to get out of the way of the whirling blue ball of energy as he started doing hand signs. It arched slightly and tracked his movement and he was forced to leap backward at the last second. The Rasengan was just about to hit him as he landed and then it disappeared. Dao looked down at his chest in stunned surprise and then smiled over at the smoke cloud. Impressive that you could throw that much condensed chakras so far, but what good is it if you can't even hit me with it? Dao said before getting cut off by Konohamaru. Multi-demon wind shuriken, he yelled as 15 giant shuriken shot up out of the rapidly fading smoke and then went right for Dao. The large man jumped back again and again as one after another of the shurikens buried itself into the earth right where he had been a split second before. He had been pushed back over 100 feet as the last one hit the earth a foot away from his feet. He quickly regained his fighting form and was breathing heavier than before. He's full of surprises, that's for sure, Dao muttered to himself as he scanned the area for Konohamaru. The smoke cloud cleared and all he could see was toppled broken trees and the earth fissure he had made. He looked around intently for a long moment. He scanned the area searching for him and suddenly the shuriken at his feet poofed. Konohamaru appeared at point-blank range and started attacking with a blinding series of punches. Dao barely got his guard up to defend himself before the first strike. He deflected the blow with his forearm as all but one of the rest of the shuriken spoofed into Konohamaru's as well and charged him. The large man was having trouble keeping up with avoiding and blocking all of the strikes and was being forced back. He was moving at incredible speed, ducking, weaving, and blocking the blows. Let's see you cast a jutsu when you can't make a hand sign. I'm gonna pulverize you for ever touching Hinata, he yelled while pressing his attack. The shuriken that was nearest to knocked out Hinata poofed and Konohamaru quickly heaved her onto his back. I've got to get her out of her fast. There isn't much chakra left in my clones, they will only last a few more seconds. He thought wildly as he started to run back to the village with her on his back as fast as he could. He only made it a few steps before Hanabi appeared in front of him with a very put-out look on her face. "Drop her," she said in a commanding voice in full taijutsu form only 10 feet in front of him. "Hanbei! What are you doing?" he whispered to her loudly. "My clones are almost out of chakra. We have to get Hinata out of here fast." She looked angrily at her slumped-over sister on his back and yelled, "I said drop her. That is not who you think it is, Konohamaru." Konohamaru, confused look changed to one of shocked surprise as the seemingly passed-out Hinata put a kunai to his throat. She kicked the back of his knees and grappled his arms out behind him with one hand. He fell to his knees, unable to move, as she pressed the kunai harder on his neck. Hinata smiled and spoke in a high female voice that was not her own. He, the juggler veined, "It's always such a gusher." She moved the kunai over to the side of his neck. Hanabi scowled at her and said, "Cut the crap. I know who you are. What possible reason could you have for doing this to us?" Konohamaru was utterly perplexed and nervously said, "Wait, what? You know this girl? Who is she?" She tossed Konohamaru an annoyed look and bluntly said, "Shut up, Konohamaru." She turned her angry gaze back to the would-be Hinata and said through gritted teeth, "I'm going to beat you for this. Just wait until I get you home." Hanabi said like she was talking down to a child that was misbehaving and charged Hinata with blinding speed. Konohamaru cringed while closing his eyes. "Hanabi, no, don't. This psycho is gonna slit my throat before she lets go of me if you attack her," he thought in a panic. He was suddenly let go and fell onto all fours, panting. He was trying to figure out what was happening as Hanabi and the imposter clashed in high-speed combat that sent out reverberations like thunder that shook the tree leaves. The clones fighting Dao popped as Konohamaru looked over at him. He expected Dao to come after him as he struggled to his feet. Dao, however, wasn't even looking in his direction. The large ninja in black was just standing there watching Hanabi and Hinata clash at high speed as they darted through the trees. Konohamaru's look changed to confusion as he caught a glimpse of Dao's right eye. "What the? The Sharingan! What the hell is this guy doing with the Sharingan?" he thought in disbelieving shock and confusion. Wait a minute, that guy had the Sharingan in his right eye. And Hanabi said, "Wait until I get you home, huh?" He thought intently, and then suddenly his look went blank. Then that means that this Hinata is... He thought in disbelief with wide eyes. Shino, Kiba, Akamaru, and Hinata were slowly walking back to the village on the main road. Kiba, Akamaru, and Hinata were walking side by side as Shino walked in front of them. Kiba put his hands behind his head as he lazily strolled forward. Man, the last mission was such a bore. Nothing happened at all. Hinata looked away shyly and said, "I'd prefer the missions I lead to go smoothly." Kiba gave her a sour look and said, "A mission going smoothly is fine, but if nothing happens then we are just bored to tears for days. Come on, you had to want something to happen. You know, something that was exciting to get your heart pumping," he said as he clenched his fist in front of himself. Shino suddenly stopped and turned his head over his shoulder. "I prefer quiet missions as well, Kiba. There is less risk and it is easy money for the village," he said without emotion. "I think your time in the Umbu has made you expect too much from each mission," he said, and then turned around to keep walking. Kiba rolled his eyes at the back of Shino's head as Akamaru nudged Hinata's hand. She absent-mindedly patted him a few times as they walked. Kiba turned his sour look over at Hinata's. His look changed to a knowing one as he eyed the golden sphere-like necklace she was wearing. "Or maybe you have enough excitement in your life already, Hinata," he said suggestively to her. She sighed loudly and gave him a tired look like she was expecting him to say something perverted again. "What could you possibly mean?" she said, already regretting that she was even asking him. He gave her a knowing smile and said, "I'm talking about Konohamaru." She immediately blushed and looked down. Two haven't spoken to him since the party at the Hyuga Manor, she said nervously as she pointed her pointer fingers together. He gave her a big smile and said, I see. So you do like him. I never thought you'd go for guys so much younger than you. She looked away in embarrassment. He threw his head back to laugh just as the sound of a far-off explosion echoed in the distance. They all stopped and their faces became serious as Kiba sniffed the air. Shino looked to Kiba as he said, It's no good, they're upwind. I can't smell 'em. Hinata activated her Byakugan and looked in the direction that the sound came from. It's out of my range as well, Shino, she said. Shino slowly turned and looked in the direction of the explosion for a long moment. It certainly didn't come from one of the training grounds. There aren't any this far north of the village, he said calmly. Kiba's face suddenly turned into a big smile and said, That means we have found some action. Akamaru. He turned to his dog and it barked twice in agreement as the both leaped into the trees. Hinata sighed. He has only gotten more brash since joining the Umbu, she said in exasperation. Shino looked over at her with his hand casually in his pockets and said, True, but you shouldn't be looking to me to take over leading just because something new happens. She winces slightly and sadly said, I'm sorry. It's just a force of habit. He nodded at her and said, So what are we going to do, leader? She sighed heavily as she slumped her shoulders. We were almost home too, she said as she looked at the ground in disappointment. She picked up her head and said, We can't just let him go alone. Kami only know what he would do. He nodded respectfully and leaped into the trees to follow Kiba. She rolled her eyes and followed. Shino and Hinata were leaping through the trees right next to each other and Kiba was 80 yards ahead of them. Come on, you two slowpokes. We're almost there, he started to say, but was cut off by a new sound hitting in rapid succession that made him stop in his tracks on a tree branch. Shino and Hinata landed to either side of him. Kiba's look was intensely serious as he looked ahead through the tree-covered forest. Two haven't heard a sound like that since, he started to say, since Hanabi fought Konohamaru as the Chunnin exams. Shino stated calmly, That is incredibly high-level taijutsu combat, Kiba. If you went rushing blindly into it, we would likely be retrieving your corpse in pieces. Hinata warned him sternly. Kiba grabbed his hair with both hands and yelled in disappointment. Damn! Here I thought I was finally going to get some action, and it's likely that it's just Konohamaru and Hanabi sparring. He looked forward and crouched to his knees with a sour look on his face. Akamaru gave him an empathetic whine. Shino looked at Hinata, waiting to see what she decided to do as their leader. She thought about it for a moment as the sounds of thunder rang again and again. With splintering in the distance rang out as she looked to them and said, We should go investigate this. It is too close to the village and not at one of the training ground. It could be a real combat situation. Kiba rolled his eyes and said, Yes, leader. He leaped ahead with Akamaru as Shino and Hinata followed. They moved at high speed through the trees until Kiba looked over his shoulder in mid-flight and asked, Hinata, you see anything yet? She hit the branch of a tree and bounded off if it as she said, Yes, I see one of them up ahead, it's Konohamaru, and there's a large man that I don't recognize near him. Kiba sighed and said, I knew it, it's just them sparring. He said sourly, I don't think so. There's way too much destruction to the area around them for it to be a normal sparring match. There are also two others, but they are moving so fast that I can't tell who they are, she said as the sound of thunder hitting in rapid succession rang out again even louder. They quickly came to the clearing of broken trees and a earth fissure with top trees in it. Konohamaru and Dao were both watching the fight play out as two ninja clashed at high speed. They landed in a tree on the perimeter of the fighting area and watched for a moment. Hinata, can you tell who they are? Shino asked. No, they are still moving too fast, she said while scanning the area as Kiba sniffed the air and then smiled as he turned to them. I know who the other two are. he said as a tree limb near them suddenly exploded from a high-speed impact that sent splinters in all directions. Kiba's smile faded instant as he quickly stepped in front of Hinata to shield her as Shino instantly leaped to a branch behind a tree trunk. "Look out!" he yelled to Hinata as he braced himself for onslaught of the splinters of wood. They got within 2 feet of him and clatter off of the air like an invisible wall was around him. A very loud crack, like thunder, that hit in Hanabi and the would-be Hinata could finally be seen. Hanabi's face showed a very annoyed look as her arm was buried up to her forearm in a tree trunk from the power of her strike. She had her other arm straight out behind her for balance in the lunge-type attack. The would-be Hinata was nearly bent over backward to avoid the powerful strike, but her head was still point forward and touching the lips of Hanabi like they were kissing. The real Hinata blushed in annoyance and clenched her fist in front of her at them. Kiba looked over at her with a knowing perverted smile as Shino's cheeks turned a slight shade of pink as he cleared his throat loudly. Hanabi angrily pulled her arm free and then grabbed the back of fake Hinata by the hair as she pulled her into a powerfully and bone-popping kiss. The fake Hinata gave her a look of utter shock and surprise. Hanabi yanked their lips apart with a loud pop and threw her to the side. She rolled twice on the ground and landed on her rear before poofing into smoke. "What reason could you possibly have for doing this, Naruto? I thought my sister really was taken. Do you know how worried I was?" She yelled at him angrily as the smoke cleared and Naruto was on the ground coughing for air. He took in several sharp breaths trying to get his breath that she had stolen from him. Kiba shot Hinata a perverted smile. He started to say from his prone position before Hinata clenched her fist tighter and her knuckles cracked. "If you two are going to do something kinky out in the woods, then don't transform into me while you are doing it," she yelled angrily at Naruto. She turned her anger on Konohamaru and he shirked away from her. "And you! How could you be part of this? You're the Hokage's grandson, for crying out loud!" she yelled and then stormed away in disgust. Kiba clapped loudly with a boyish smile and said, "Hey, can we see more of that sister-on-sister action?" Shino immediately bowed and forced Kiba to bow with his hand on his head and said, "We are sorry, Hanabi. We did not realize this was a training exercise. We only came to make sure the village wasn't being attacked. Again, I'm sorry for my squad's behavior." He grabbed the slightly annoyed Kiba and leaped away. Konohamaru just hung his head in dismay. Hanabi's look changed to a blank look as the large ninja in black poofed into Kakashi. Naruto hung his head and said, "Why does it always turn out this way?" Hanabi backpedaled a few steps in shock and said, "Wait, a training exercise?" Konohamaru hung his head and said in dismay, "Great, she probably hates me now." He slumped his shoulders and looked at the ground. Kakashi eyed both of them carefully and said, "Yes, a training exercise." But why?" she said in disbelief. Naruto stood up and looked at her sadly. "Because Tsunade will not send us on any missions because of me." His hand instinctively covered his stomach before he looked up and began again. "So I made a fake mission for you two to get some experience fighting together in a real combat situation. I asked Kakashi to help me a few days ago. He is the one that planned all this out. I've never been good at this sort of thing." Konohamaru sighed. "You're better at deception than I thought, Naruto. I really thought Hinata was in trouble. Now it's me in trouble with Hinata." Hanabi nodded respectfully in agreement and said, "I never would have thought you were capable of saying those kinds of things about me and Hinata." He gave them a weak smile and said, "It wasn't easy for me, but I had to make you think it was all real. Otherwise it would have been pointless. Naruto practiced this fake mission with me for the last 2 days for you too. You both fought seriously until Hanabi figured out that Hinata was actually Naruto. When the illusion of the mission was revealed and she attacked him without fear of being hurt or killed, she knew Naruto wouldn't try to kill her. It was then that the training exercise failed," Kakashi said. Konohamaru looked off in a lost manner and said to himself, "How am I going to explain all this to Hinata?" Kakashi eyed him sternly and said, "You should keep your mind focused on that task at hand, Konohamaru." Konohamaru stood up a bit straighter, but it was still plain to see he was worried about his situation with Hinata. Kakashi said, "Let's go over what you did right and what you did wrong during this mission. Firstly, you hid when Naruto's Kiba clone came onto the training field. You were carefully here, you did this part right. But after you saw him hurt, you immediately went to help him without even trying to confirm his identity." He turned and looked at Hanabi and said, "Hanabi, what does Kiba smell like?" She blinked blankly at him a few times, trying to process his odd question. She thought about it for a moment and then said, Well, that he doesn't have a strong smell, but he kind of smells like." She awkwardly thought of how to phrase it nicely. "Like a wild animal." Kakashi finished it for her. "But what did Naruto's clone Kiba smell like?" Hanabi shyly looked down in shame and said, "He smelled like sweat and the soap Naruto uses to wash his uniforms." And Kiba was bleeding, yet did you smell any blood?" he asked her carefully. She looked even lower and admitted, No, I didn't, now that I think about it." Konohamaru's look suddenly changed to confusion before he asked, "Hey, why aren't you asking me these questions? Why are you picking on Hanabi?" "I was there too." Kakashi looked over at him and asked, "Don't you remember learning in the academy why one girl is almost always put in every squad, Konohamaru?" He gave him a blank look and then he clearly guessed. Because they don't resort to fighting as fast as a guy?" Kakashi sighed and then said, "Sometimes that is true, but there are times when women will resort to violence much quicker than men, but that is not what I'm talking about." Konohamaru gave him a strained smile as he scratched the back of his head innocently. "I guess I probably skipped that day of class then." Kakashi sighed again as Naruto just shook his head in disappointment. Hanabi wore a confused look as well as Kakashi pointed his open hand at them and said, "Then let's have a little demonstration to show you one of the many reasons. Konohamaru, go smell Hanabi and tell me what she smells like right now." Konohamaru gave him a perplexed look for a moment and then carefully walked over to Hanabi. She seemed a bit nervous as he leaned his head over and smelled her hair. He took another 2 sniffs to be sure as Hanabi blushed slightly and then turned back to Kakashi. She smells faintly of a flowery shampoo, I guess," he said in thought. Kakashi nodded and turned to Hanabi. "Hanabi, what does Konohamaru smell like right now?" Unlike Konohamaru that got right up to her to smell her, she took a step back and covered her nose. I don't mean to be rude, Konohamaru, but you smell like, well, body odor, sweat and slightly of lavender. Also, I don't think you changed socks this morning because you reek of foot odor. You also smell like fear and worry," she said in a reserved manner. Konohamaru looked down in embarrassment and said, "Sorry, I kind of ran out of socks this morning and I worked up quite a sweat fighting." "Don't you see? There are differences in men and women, Konohamaru. You got right up to her to smell her and only had a vague idea of what she smelled like. She, on the other hand, was 3 feet away from you and not only smelled your scent, but also smelled the chemicals your body released under stress," he said wisely. Konohamaru gave him a confused look. Konohamaru turned and gave Hanabi an awkward look as Kakashi shook his head. "No, Konohamaru, the Hyuga clan doesn't have a super sense of smell." Konohamaru looked at him blankly and Kakashi's shoulder slumped. He thought for a moment while rubbing his chin on how to explain it to him. His look suddenly brightened as he pointed his finger up and smiled. "Well, Konohamaru, have you noticed that women always smell better than men?" he asked. Konohamaru thought about it for a moment and then finally said, I never noticed it before, but now that you mention it. Yeah, they do. Why is that, Kakashi-sensei?" Kakashi smiled as he pointed to his nose. "That is simple. It is because they have a much stronger sense of smell than us." He looked at Kakashi in mild surprise and said, "Really? Is that as true?" "Of course it is. Haven't you been listening? This is one of the many differences between men and women. They have different things they are better at than men and also have a different way of looking at a problem. The reason one female is put in almost every squad is to create diversity in the way each member of the squad thinks. Let's take your squad for example," he said while pointing at him. You are a combat type. You are physically the strongest in your squad. You have more ninjutsu and taijutsu than Moegi and Udon because you train a lot more than them. When faced with a conflict, you are quick to engage the opposition in head-on battle instead of thinking out a strategy. Moegi, on the other hand, isn't really a combat type. She has always been more of a support type of person. She thinks of how best to help you and adjusts her tactics to suit the situation depending on how you react. Now Udon, on the other hand, is a thinking and strategy type of ninja. He will think carefully about a situation, weighing the risk and reward of an action before deciding what to do. Truth be told, just from the facts, Udon would probably make a better squad leader than you because he uses his head a lot more. Kakashi said knowingly. Konohamaru looked at him in offense and said, "Hey, I've always been the leader of our group. I've gotten us through loads of mission." Kakashi sighed deeply and said, "Even after all this time you still don't understand your squad. Very well then, I'll explain it to you. Let's take the mission you had in the Land of Waves 4 years ago, where you were supposed to observe a group of people's activities and report back. On your way there you all spotted a group of highwaymen harassing a merchant for passage money. You told your squad that you all had to help him, yet you were on a mission that required the utmost stealth and secrecy. Udon told you in so many words that this was not your problem, and Moegi agreed. You felt that they were being cowardly and boldly jumped down into the clearing. You announced your presence loudly and told them to leave the merchant alone. Moegi didn't like it, but she did what she does best and jumped down to assist you. Udon, on the other hand, could have come up with a good strategy for attack if you hadn't hastily jumped out, throwing his strongest skill out the window. So he nervously goes down to help the both of you, even though he is not a combat type of fighter. You and Moegi mopped the floor with them while Udon barely helped. So what? We won, and besides, that was years ago." Konohamaru said, slightly annoyed as he crossed his arms. Kakashi eyed him carefully and said, "Did you ever stop to think how Udon felt when you did that time and again?" He gave him a confused look. "Did you ever think that maybe he felt ousted and worthless to the mission when you always choose that path that made you shine the most?" Kakashi said, and Konohamaru looked down in shame. "To get where you're coming from, but I've changed a lot since then." Kakashi eyed him sternly and said, "Have you really?" Konohamaru looked over at him questioningly and said, "Yes, I have. Even though I didn't always think things through, we never got seriously hurt and completed most of our missions." "I feel you are wrong here, Konohamaru. You haven't changed. It was Moegi and Udon that changed. You never took their advice to heart and always did things like a combat ninjutsu user. They in turn decided to become more like you to complement your style. Moegi learned healing ninjutsu from Sakura to heal you back up after doing something brash. Udon ultimately found a very competent master to teach him how to be a ninjutsu user and still be a strategy-type ninja. He was so competent that he hasn't taken on any students in decades until Konohamaru. No one was ever good enough for him." Konohamaru rolled his eyes and said, "Yeah, I know, Red Dog or whatever his name is." Kakashi shook his head at him in exasperation and said, "Red Claw, his name is Red Claw. You would do well to remember that. Tell me, do you even know what his master looks like?" Konohamaru gave him an odd questioning look and said, "No, not really, but what would that matter?" Well then, what do you think he might look like?" Kakashi asked carefully. Konohamaru looked up and thought for a moment and then shrugged his shoulders. "I'd guess he'd kind of look like you, a man nearing his 40s and a capable ninja." Kakashi said, "And if I told you that he was a 90-year-old man that could hardly get from his house to a nearby dock to going fishing every day without a cane?" "Wait, what?" Konohamaru said in shock. "What could an old man like that teach Udon? Why would he ever choose a master like that?" Kakashi nodded his head slightly and said, "That's just how I thought you'd react. I've already told you Udon thinks carefully before making a decision. Where you see an old feeble man, Udon sees a wealth of knowledge that you would have overlooked." Konohamaru was slightly outraged and said, "Oh, come on! How could Udon pick a decrepit old man as his master? There is more to being a master than just a wealth of knowledge. Naruto looked over at him honestly and said, I'm afraid you are wrong, Konohamaru. That is all there is to being a master. Konohamaru looked over at him in stunned blank manner. Kakashi cleared his throat loudly and said, Yes, that is true. I doubt you will understand that until you have students of your own. But to get back on topic, let me tell you a little about that decrepit old man, as you so called him. Where to start? Ah yes, how about the fact that he beat the 4th Hokage in both of their sparring matches? Blank looks of shock came over Naruto, Hanabi, and Konohamaru. Kakashi smiled to himself. Yes, I thought that might get your attention. Not only that, he was appointed to the head of the Umbu Black Ops at the age of 17. In fact, it was under the order of the 2nd Hokage that Red Claw made the Umbu. He is the order's patriarch, the first leader of the Umbu. Their blank looks turned to utter shock. Kakashi smiled knowingly and said, That is not all. Udon is his second student. He had only one other student of sorts. Konohamaru shook his head to clear away his daze and asked, Who? If this guy was such a big wig, then who else did he teach? He must be a famous ninja if Red Claw is as powerfully as you said. Kakashi nodded his head in agreement as he said, Yes, he was a very famous ninja and you all have heard his name many times. Konohamaru's impatience got the best of him as he intently asked, Then who was this student? Kakashi looked over at him seriously and said, The only other person to become the leader of the Umbu Black Ops in his teens, Itachi Uchiha. Konohamaru looked at him soullessly and said, Itachi? I thought his master was his father. No, his father was at best his sensei, not his true master. He trained under Red Claw mostly unnoticed to even him until he was 13 while he was in the Umbu. Red Claw then told him that he had all the leadership and cunning needed to be a great leader. He promoted him to the head of the Umbu Black Ops and announced his retirement. The council gave him a bit of trouble, but with a record like his they couldn't refute his words. They agreed to promote a boy barely into his teens to the highest rank of the Umbu. Konohamaru blinked at him blankly for a long moment and then said, Wow, I never knew he was training under a guy like that. Kakashi nodded to himself and then returned his gaze to him as he said, I know. You never thought to ask Udon about his master. Even if you did, Udon probably wouldn't have told you much because he knew you'd react the same way you did when I told you. I told you that you haven't changed, it was Moegi and Udon that changed. They didn't have a choice as you never used them for the strengths they already had. You used them for the strengths you had. Sure, you'd use the things they were good at if you weren't in combat, like when Udon figured out most of the first part of the second task of the Chunnin exams. What happened after you came to the field to protect that scroll for me and 3 other Umbu? Konohamaru lowered his head. Instead of letting Udon formulate a plan that used all 3 of your individual strengths to your advantage, you literally picked them up and dragged them away as fast as you could. You were yelling and screaming the whole way. Even when you did throw us off with the Shadow Clone Jutsu, we easily found you again. How many smoke bombs and paper bombs were you carrying? Yet you didn't even try to use them as a distraction once. You didn't even return to the right training ground where you got the scroll. Instead, you ran 14 kilometers back to where you got the first scroll when all you had to do was head back 800 meters to the training ground where you got the second scroll. Even on this mission, even after you received sage training from the Monkey Clan, you disregarded your teammates' opinions. Elder Raichi told me he had taught you to use your head, and yet when things became dire you reverted back to your old ways. You just headed blindly after your target without regard for Shino and Hanabi. You didn't even try to work with them and took several jutsus head-on. This is not very smart, nor is it the way of the ninja. He told him sternly as Konohamaru continued to look down in shame. It was only when you saw Hanabi struggling that you decided to use teamwork. You should have used it from the start. The actual plan was to have Naruto's Shino clone help you, but you disregarded him. So your ally became your foe instead. You lost your cool when Hanabi kept hers. She had a lot more to lose than you'd. It was her sister that had been kidnapped after all. He turned to Hanabi and asked, Why didn't you try harder to get Konohamaru to work with you? She looked over at him and said, "Because I have fought with him, and from that fight I have come to understand him. I too was worried for my sister, but he was far more worried. You think we do not use teamwork, yet you fail to understand how much faith we have in one another. Part of teamwork is knowing how a person will react to any given situation and having faith in them. You didn't give us much time at the start to working together, as you separated us quickly. The first time he could come to me so we could work together, he did. He took on the more dangerous task of being bait while giving me time to enter sage mode. I feel we worked quite well together," she said as her sage marks receded into thin dark lines around her eyes. She swooned slightly and took a step back to catch herself. Konohamaru picked his head up and asked Kakashi in a lost manner, "Hey, why did you pass us at the Chunnin exams if you felt we failed?" Kakashi looked over at him solemnly and then turned and looked up to the clouds. "Well, about that. You may not have returned to the right place, but you did return to where you had gotten one of the scrolls with 4 highly trained Umbu on you the whole time. You carried both your teammates and their gear for miles and miles with us hot on your heels. You protected them the entire way. That is a vital skill to have as a leader. Always bring your squad back in one piece. While we were discussing the outcome of your results, you angrily asked for the next scroll even though Moegi and Udon could hardly stand. You were determined that the second task couldn't be over yet. It had to be harder and have more parts. You expected more tasks because you felt that becoming a Chunnin couldn't be that easy. You were willing to carry your squad all day if you had to succeed. Still, I felt you failed and was going to flunk you." Konohamaru looked at him sadly with a lost expression and asked, "So what was it that made you decide to pass us?" Kakashi turned his gaze onto him and said, "It was because of Naruto that I passed you." He gave him a curious look and said, "Because of Naruto?" "Yes, while I was deciding I looked at Naruto. I felt you had failed, yet when I looked at him I saw how proud he was of you in his eyes. You were becoming the ninja he trained you to be. I remembered how my master, the 4th Hokage, talked about Jiraiya. He told me about how he always talked about guts and never giving up." He sighed as he shook his head at the ground and honestly said, "Sensei Minato always said he wanted to be just like Jiraiya, but he told me he could never be that brave. That he could never have the kind of unwavering faith in himself like his master did. He always spoke of him in reverence like a person he wanted to become like, and yet he knew no matter how hard he tried he'd never surpass his master. He told me that he always wanted more time to plan out an attack, but real combat never gave him all the time he wanted. Sensei Minato grew in a different way than Master Jiraiya. He found a much different path than his master and forged ahead largely on his own. He thought a lot more about a task and didn't always approach a problem head-on. He had the strength to take most tasks head-on but choose not to. This is one of the many reasons he was chosen as the 4th Hokage. Master Jiraiya ultimately made Naruto his disciple, and he even said that he understood his teachings more than Sensei Minato did. I see many of Jiraiya teachings in you. And some of his faults as well." He gave Konohamaru a knowing look before speaking again. He passed his teaching down to Naruto, and Naruto in turn passed them down to you. I passed you because Naruto felt you passed, and who am I to fail you when your master felt that you didn't fail? I learned to have faith in Naruto over the years. After all, Naruto turned out to be a great ninja. I'm sure he has a plan for you as well, but you really do need to break yourself of one of his worst habits." Konohamaru gave him a questioning look, and Kakashi said, "Don't try to do everything by yourself and rush head-on into a fight. That's why you're on a team after all. Remember to use all of your teammates' strengths, not just your own." Konohamaru gave him an understanding look and nodded. "Yeah, I guess I do need to work on my teamwork a bit more. Maybe I'll let Udon lead the next mission and see how it turns out." "I think that's a very good idea, Konohamaru," Kakashi said. "But first you two need to go back to the training ground so we can do this lesson again." Konohamaru's face faltered as Hanabi looked changed to one that could only mean you got to be kidding me. Konohamaru scrambled to his feet and said, "Ah, come on. No way. I'm already beat as it is." Naruto gave Kakashi a reserved look as he went over to the exhausted Hanabi and put her arm around his shoulders for support. Come on, Kakashi-sensei, you know they can't do this exercise again. Konohamaru is too tired and Hanabi is out of chakra. What possible reason could you have for suggesting that? Naruto asked casually. 2 rivers of tears streamed down his pouting face as he pointed to the camera in his hand. But I didn't get a picture of Hanabi kissing your Hinata clone. I already missed getting the one when you kissed Tsunade too, he said in utter disappointment. Hanabi blushed deeply as Naruto's sweat dropped and fell over. A short while later they were all walking back to the training ground. Hanabi was so tired that Naruto had to lend her his shoulder for support while Kakashi and Konohamaru walked beside him. When they were almost back to the training ground, Naruto broke the silence. Hey Kakashi. Kakashi looked over at him curiously. You said that Red Claw beat the 4th Hokage in both their sparring matches. What reason did they have for sparring in the first place? Wasn't Red Claw already pretty old by then? Kakashi turned back to looking ahead of him as they walked and said, Well, it's kind of an odd story, truth be told. Where to begin? He scratched his chin and thought. Well, I guess the first time was because Jiraiya was bragging about him and Red Claw overheard him and decided to test his student. Red Claw was dressed as a fisherman and Minato never did know he was sparring with one of the most elite ninjas in the village. Minato was only 14 at the time and was already used to being called prodigy and genius. It wasn't much of a sparring match. Minato lost to the leader of the Umbu within a few seconds, as you might have guessed. I think Red Claw did it just to shut Jiraiya up. He was known to gloat about his favorite student a lot back then, or so they say. The other time wasn't much of a sparring match either. I know you all have this larger-than-life way of looking at the 4th Hokage, but he was still human. Not everything he did was so perfect and grand with lofty ideals behind his actions. He made mistakes as well. He was down about a mission he had led that went wrong. No one died, mind you, but he felt that he failed in some way. He was about 20 years old and went out with Jiraiya for a few drinks. Jiraiya got hammered and passed out. Minato only had a few drinks and was very drunk. He didn't have much of a tolerance for drinking. He was so drunk that he thought he was back on the battlefield and launched his kunais out in the middle of the main street. He began time/space jump all over the place, attacking random things like they were enemies. The villagers saw the hero of the village at his lowest and quickly ran from his drunken fighting of his hallucinations. With Jiraiya passed out and unable to calm him, the Umbu were sent in to handle the situation. Red Claw himself came with 2 other Umbu guards. He watched Minato carefully blinking all over the place, attacking and wreaking destruction all over the place. He then took a few steps forward and dodged a swiping attack from Minato. He reared his fist back just as Minato appeared in front of him and landed a heavy blow to his stomach. He said smartly. Konohamaru was intently staring at him and said, And? Kakashi smiled as he held his pointer finger up smartly. And he threw up all over himself. He passed out and spent the night in jail. Minato told me that the 3rd Hokage yelled at him and Jiraiya for hours the next morning. Naruto laughed slightly. I just can't picture the 4th Hokage staggering around drunk doing something like that. Is that really true? He asked, slightly skeptical. Kakashi nodded his head and said, Yes, it's all true. Minato told me the story himself. They stopped at the center of the training ground and Naruto put Hanabi on the ground and started healing her. An Umbu guard appeared in front of Kakashi and made a few hand signs and then vanished. Kakashi's expressions turned to a curious one as Naruto asked, What is it? The guard whispered something to him. It seems I have some things I have to take care of. I will leave you all here, he said, and then held up a hand sign and vanished into smoke. Konohamaru looked over at Naruto healing Hanabi and said, What's next for training? Naruto smiled slightly and said, I was thinking we would take it easy until after lunch. It was a clear cold night with a full moon hanging low in the starry sky as Kakashi was waved into the Hokage's office. Tsunade's look was serious and slightly dire. Kakashi eyed her carefully and asked, "What is it that you needed? You know this is the time when I do my own paperwork that is heavily mounting up since this morning." She looked down and took a deep breath. She slowly opened the top drawer and pulled out 2 bound scrolls. One was black and the other was royal red with a violet lightning bolt seal on it. Kakashi's eyes widened slightly a while looking at them. An S-rank mission scroll from the Land of Lightning? What could be so important that they would send us an S-rank mission scroll? She stood up and held the scrolls out as Kakashi walked up to her and took them from her. He started reading the black scroll intently. It was intel on 4 highly trained and highly awarded Umbu ninjas. Their teamwork and effectiveness in working together was second to none. Each of them had over 20 years' experience fighting and doing missions with their comrades. Their success rate for missions was so high that Kakashi didn't think that even the Umbu of the Leaf had a squad up to their stats. Kakashi looked over at her as he tucked the black scroll away. I wish I had such a capable Umbu squad in my ranks, but why would the Land of Lightning ever let anyone outside their land see this roster? It even has their jutsu and how they use them together in it. There is no way they would willingly let us see these without good reason. He commented carefully as Tsunade sat down solemnly. He opened the red scroll with the rakish broken seal on. It read, "Dear Hokage, I am writing you to ask for your assistance with a situation that has become dire to my nation's stability. My High Council has voiced its opinion strongly to avoid any outside help on this matter, but the risk has become far too great for me to heed their words any longer. You may be wondering why I sent you documents that are so secret that they should be locked away in our archives and never have seen the light of day for 50 years. It's because you will need them if you accept this mission. 2 months ago Roland, the head of our Umbu Black Ops, stepped down and nominated another to succeed him. Me and my High Council were wary of who he nominated as he lacked experience. Roland assured us he was up to the task and even offered to stay in the Umbu in his old squad under this new man's command. We reluctantly agreed to it, and at first everything was fine. The Umbu's success rate in missions even rose under our new Umbu leader. Roland's squad sent out constantly on missions and never failed to complete their mission. We thought everything was going well, but what Roland was actually doing was whipping his old squad back into shape for another reason. 3 days ago our main archive was broken into and all the guards on duty were killed. The intruders stole village secrets vital to our village. The manner and efficient way that they went through the archive suggested that at least one of them had been there before. The way the guards were killed is consistent with our own Umbu techniques. Roland's squad had just been sent out on a mission when we found out about this. Since the evidence clearly pointed to one of our own doing this, I sent an Umbu squad to recall them. After a day they didn't return and I sent out the 4 best squads I had to go after them. Only one member made it back and he was heavily injured. He told us that they had found the first squad we sent out murdered and their bodies hastily hidden. They continued to follow Roland's squad until they were ambushed by them. He told us everything happened so fast that he was the only one that managed to escape and reveal Roland's treachery. His squad is heading west and we believe he is heading to the Land of Earth to sell our secrets. We already have strained relations with the Land of Earth and if they get their hands on the scrolls Roland took we will likely end up going to war with them. I humbly ask, may I beg you? Please send the great sage Naruto Uzumaki on this mission. He already ended the 4th Great Ninja War. Surely he can stop this one as well. The mission is simple as the 4-man squad has already proven to be above capture. They are to be killed on sight and the scrolls returned to me personally. Roland has likely crossed our western border by the time you get this, so you must make haste. I know I am asking a lot from the Leaf and I know the help of the hero of the 5 Nation will not come cheaply. I am prepared to offer you 10 million yen now and another 4 million by the winter solstice next year. I would offer more, but it's all our yearly budget can allow and even more so. Please help us avoid destabilizing the 5 ninja nations and avert a war. Darui Talika, 5th Raikage of the Land of Lightning. Kakashi calmly looked up from the scroll and skeptically asked, "Do you really think that are serious offering this amount of money for this mission?" I mean, this could be a fake mission scroll. Tsunade looked down and sighed. Fake mission scrolls aren't delivered with the Rakich's personal Anbu guards, and they don't come with this, she said as she turned her chair sideways and used her leg to move a heavy chest out into view with the sounds of metal on wood as it slid. She flipped the iron lock open and lifted the lid. The large chest was full of shiny gold. You really think they intend to pay that much for our help? He asked. Tsunade gave him an annoyed look and said, well, I haven't had anyone count it yet, but it looked pretty close to 10 million yen to me. Tsunade looked down and signed in indecision. The village could really use the money, but this could hurt the Land of Lightning offering so much to us. His guards told me that it didn't have to be Naruto to complete the mission to get the payment so long as it's done, but they felt he was the best suited for it, she said as she looked down and slumped her shoulders. Kakashi pulled out the black scroll and went over the information again and again. I couldn't hope to send a squad on this mission that I could even give a 50% chance of success with the data they have given. It is not that they are all super powerful ninjas, it is how they work together that makes them so deadly. They have gone beyond even needing to use a secret hand sign language to communicate. If it wasn't such sensitive information pertaining to an S-rank mission, I'd have these documents posted at the academy to show everyone just how important teamwork is. They are a shining example of that if nothing else, he said as he eyed the documents. Tsunade picked her head up and asked him with a tired tone, can you make a team for this mission without Naruto? Kakashi thought about it and said, not with even close to a team with a better than half chance of success's rate. If I had all of my best ninja here, the ideal group to send would be either Naruto by himself or Naruto, Might Guy, myself and you, or Sakura as a medical ninja. Since they are so far away, the squad would need great stamina just to reach them in time. Hence the reason I suggested this type of group, but Guy and Lee are already out on the mission I was gave this morning. It is a mission to stop a large group bandits that have set up base at our southern border. I sent Anbu squads 9 and 12 as well. So Sai isn't around either. The Anbu are spread too thin at the moment to take on this mission. If the Land of Lightning really is willing to pay this much for the mission, then there must really be a serious chance for war because of it. War between the Land of Earth and the Land of Lightning will destabilize all 5 of the ninja nation. After they have battled it out and both sides are severely weakened, they both will become very tempting targets for the other 3 nations. Too tempting, in fact, even we would have to weigh the risk of the other 2 nations attacking them and unbalancing the power that has already kept us at peace for so long. Even if this mission paid nothing, we would still have to take it on for the sake of the 5 nations, he said with an understanding look. Tsunade grabbed her elbows and looked away. Of the ninja we have available, who would you send? She said, already know the answer. Kakashi looked at her for a long moment and then said, I'd have to recommend Naruto, of course. He is the only one that has fought a group with this caliber of teamwork and not only survived but won. Tsunade nodded to the floor sadly and said quietly, I know. When he fought his uncle Nagato Uzumaki, and he didn't even know he was the only other living member for his clan. She sighed deeply and then picked her head up to look at him. What other ninjas would you recommend for the squad, Kakashi? Kakashi looked at her and seriously said, Sakura, of course. They have worked together for most of their ninja careers. You know, Hanabi will not be separated from Naruto for any great length of time because of the jutsu he performed on her, among other things. So we have Sakura, Hanabi, and Naruto. With Sai already out on a mission, I think you already know who best would fit in with Squad 7, he said suggestively. Tsunade sighed and said, I know who you are talking about, but I'm already uncomfortable with Hanabi going. Yes, both of them attain the rank of sage, but they are both largely untested. You know, Naruto has never once completed an assassination mission the way it was supposed to be done as well. He never was the type of person that could kill a target without trying to resolve it peacefully first. Kakashi nodded his head in agreement and said, Yes, that is true, but he has never failed to turn an enemy into an ally in the end if he could. It is greatest power to make anyone believe in him. How can we not believe in him now? Tsunade shook her head and said, I really don't like this, it's exactly the kind of mission he wanted to send his students on. Flashback. Naruto and Tsunade were drinking on top of the Hokage monument on a clear cool night. She calmed herself and got serious for a moment. Is that really all you thinking about? He looked over at her with an honest look and said, I think about my greatest fear a lot of the times when I come up here. She sighed and wrapped her arms around her knees as she laid head on them. So you're thinking about Kyuubi? He gave her a weird look, shook his head. No, Kyuubi isn't my greatest fear, he said with his mind as far away as his gaze on the stars of the night. She shot him a puzzled look and asked, Then what is? He nodded his head a few times. It's that first day after I become Hokage, when I sit down at that desk to serve the village. It's when I pick up that first really hard mission and I have to hand it to one of my friends knowing they might not come back from it. She looked over at him honestly and said, As much as I complain about the paperwork, I have to admit that's my greatest fear too.
That's it for this video. I hope you all enjoyed the video. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and follow me on my other social media accounts. Anime God here, and I'm signing off.